Chapter 142. Caesar of course did not agree to it. He had made a lot of preparations before coming to the northern kingdoms. Of course, it was not only for revenge and to slaughter Brendel's family. He also had a long-term plan to take over the Khaki territory. So Caesar wanted the shapeshifters to observe the leaders of the Brendel family first. They would only attack after they were able to completely imitate them. Otherwise, the Black Dragon would not be able to guarantee that the enemy's corpse would be intact. He might even bring back a pile of charcoal. No matter how strong the shapeshifters were, they would not be able to imitate a pile of charcoal. Now that he had the absolute initiative, the Brendel family needed his help. Caesar had the right to make requests and conditions. He tried his best to avoid unnecessary things and try to solve the problem once and for all. What he did not know was that his direct refusal had unintentionally helped him avoid a big trap. 2 days after being rejected by Count Tangerine, Nina Brendel came again. He first expressed his apologies for his unreasonable request, and then said that he had persuaded his father that Count Tangerine came from a foreign country, and the guest's rights should be protected. In the end, Nina said that Count Tangerine was willing to trust his friend enough and agreed to let Tangerine bring his servants to meet him. It was a success. After everything was prepared, Caesar and the forest fairies boarded a luxurious carriage, while Nina chose to travel on a horse. He had changed into a set of bright armor and a long cloak that was decorated with a vast black field, giving him the aura of a lord. Behind them was a long line of shapeshifters and Brendel's guards. They were responsible for protecting their masters as they rode on their horses to the front lines. However, even if the horses didn't stop and their feet didn't touch the ground, the long journey still lasted for 3 days, and it could be said to be a long and drawn-out journey. If it wasn't for Luna accompanying him and chatting with him, Caesar would probably have been bored to death. At first, he thought that the Brendel family would arrange for some bandits to ambush them, but none of them appeared. The journey was unexpectedly peaceful, and they finally reached the Khaki army's camp on the evening of the 3rd day. This is too slow. Caesar sighed in his heart. He estimated that if he were to fly, it would take less than 3 hours to complete the journey. Actually, the main reason was that the road was not easy to traverse. Don't think that the roads of the northern kingdoms would be developed to a great extent. The roads here were all paved by horses' hooves and carts. Occasionally, there would be farmers who were ordered to mow the grass. It was already good enough that the roads were bumpy. According to Nina, the commander's tent was actually not in the camp of the army, but in another secret location. Therefore, after passing by the Khaki army's camp, the troops had to pass through the filthy black swamp along the embankment and enter the Hejin region on the other side. After winding for several miles, they finally arrived at their destination. Along the way, the curtain of night had already fallen. A large patch of electrified dark clouds surged over, adding a solemn and cold atmosphere to the early night. The horses stopped and the soldiers were silent. The squires quickly stepped forward to open the side door and led the nobles out of the carriage. Accompanied by Nina, Caesar stepped into the main tent. Before he could say anything, the first person he saw was Count Brendel, who was leaning over the long table and looking at the map. Stein Brendel. The Count was only 54 years old, but he looked to be at least 60 years old. The short hair in the mural was no longer the same as before. His head was bald, and his yellowish forehead was filled with wrinkles. There were only a few strands of hair left behind his ears. The Count was dressed in the simplest of casual clothes. His outer coat was made of black leather, and his inner coat was made of black velvet. He wore a pair of black iron boots. In comparison, Roy, who was pacing at the side, looked more like a commander. Roy Brendel was nearing 30 years old. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his hair was meticulously combed. He wore a full suit of armor, and there was a decorative knight's sword hanging at his waist. There was a ribbon on his chest that had the Brendel family's emblem, the gray lion, on it. In addition to the two of them, there were 4 personal guards standing at the 4 corners of the wide tent. All of them wore light armor and held their long swords in their hands at all times. Brendel and Roy looked up and saw Caesar coming in. They did not move a step, as if their feet were nailed to the ground. They stared at Caesar as if Caesar was staring at them. "Father." Nina, who was more gentle and friendly in comparison, was the first to break the short silence. He took 2 steps forward and said, "Please allow me to introduce Count Tangerine to you. He is my most respected friend. He has a warm heart and is willing to generously help the Brendel family when it is in danger. Welcome to Khaki, Your Excellency." As he spoke, Stein Brendel finally smiled and bowed to Caesar, saying, "It just so happens that Your Excellency is willing to lend a helping hand. We will never forget this friendship." As he spoke, he motioned for Caesar to take a seat and arranged for him to sit in an armchair. The Count himself sat in the seat facing the entrance of the tent. Nina and Roy sat down as well. When Caesar sat down on the armchair, he deliberately hid his face in the shadow of the tent's curtain. This way, he could hide some slight changes in his expression. His original plan was to enter the tent and let the shape-shifting servants behind him stare at the Brendel family for a while. Once they had completely memorized their faces, they would directly tear them apart. But at this time, Caesar sat down and calmly drank a cup of warm tea. He did not immediately act as planned. This was because he felt that something was amiss. Overall combat ability assessment. 45-51. This was an ordinary number that belonged to the standard of an elite human soldier. It was only slightly stronger than the Gnolls under Hogg's command. But what was unusual was that this number appeared on Roy's body. If it was the first time they met, it would make sense. But Caesar clearly remembered that Roy was an ordinary noble who neither received training nor knew how to cast spells. 7 years ago, the young noble's combat ability was only 10. How could the young noble from back then barely be able to compete with the knights now? Something was not right. If the Battle of the Wilderness 7 years ago made Roy realize that his ability was not enough, then with painstaking training and extraordinary talent, he advanced by leaps and bounds to the standard of an elite soldier, it could be barely explained. Stein Brendel, an old count who was almost 60 years old, also had the same combat ability assessment. How could this be explained? Nina, who was beside Caesar, only had a 7 in her combat ability assessment. The difference was so huge that it could be said to be subversive. Could it be that the Count's eldest son was the only useless person in the Brendel family? No, there must be something wrong somewhere. Chapter 143. It's my honor to be able to visit a god's chosen who has always been favored by the goddess of luck after arriving in the northern kingdoms. Caesar thought for a while and decided not to act rashly. Instead, he sat down quietly and spoke in a human noble's tone. "I wonder if the goddess of luck will give you another duke's scepter in the future? If I can gain the support of someone like you." Count Stein Brendel smiled and nodded. "I think so." Before this, Nina had always emphasized that Khaki was the one who was forced to defend. But now, even a fool could see that there was a problem, and there was no need for them to hide it anymore. At the end of the day, justice and evil were just names. Brendel believed that if Tangerine was really a knowledgeable noble who had traveled far and wide, he would not dwell on such vague concepts. "Then, you just need to tell me what kind of help the Brendel family needs." Caesar's face was hidden in the shadows, but his tone was gentle and kind. "Please don't be so courteous, I'm never stingy with my friends." What followed was a round of haggling. Even the highest-ranking members of the royal family were no different from peddlers pushing wheelbarrows as long as one ignored their purposeful expressions. But it was worth mentioning that the Caesar family purposely proposed many harsh and forceful terms and nitpicked many details, but they did not guard against them strictly. As long as Caesar raised an objection, they would give in. They were testing him. They were trying to find out the true intentions of the Count Tangerine. If he really came to negotiate for cooperation, He would definitely haggle over every detail and try to get the most benefit. But if Tangerine had other motives, he would probably agree to everything without hesitation. Now that he thought about it, Caesar finally understood why Nina made such a request. It turned out that the Brendel family's probing did not come from the level of strength, but from throwing out questions and letting him choose. If he was careless and did not correct his attitude, he would immediately fall into the trap and reveal his true identity. 7 years ago, when they first crossed swords, Caesar had already noticed that Roy was especially ruthless and had a deep background. The family behind him couldn't be too bad, and now it seemed that it was indeed so. However, since he had already noticed this, Caesar was naturally vigilant and did not step into such a trap. His performance was flawless as usual. After a long time, they finally finished discussing the details of the cooperation. Caesar did his best to keep up the act. He didn't show any impatience and kept smiling, fixed by the transformation necklace. When everything was ready, the old Count Stein took a pen and paper from the attendant beside him and read through the notes word by word. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he began to draft the contract. "This is our first time working together." The old Count signed Stein Brendel on the thick paper and then walked to Caesar's side and handed the contract to him. "It was a pleasure, and I hope that our friendship will continue." This distance was already enough for Caesar to reach out and crush it, but he still did not move because he already knew where the problem was. The other party was probably not a real person, so he nodded to the old Count and lowered his head to look at the contract. He noticed that in the beginning of the contract, the Brendel family prayed to the god of freedom. It seemed that they were believers of that god. But how could a lesser divine power, a god of the neutral camp, make Brendel sign so many contracts of allegiance? What's wrong with their army? He pondered in his heart, but his expression did not change. He smiled at the old Count who was close at hand and watching his every move. Then he held a straight feather pen and signed the name Garin Tangerine. The Black Dragon was actually not afraid of revealing his name, because true dragons were not hollow spirits like devils. Once their real names were called out, they would appear and be clearly seen by people, which was a huge hidden danger. The true dragons themselves were existences with flesh, so they did not need to worry about this problem. The only thing to worry about was that the dragon's blood would be absorbed and used for the blood curse. However, in an occasion like signing a contract and swearing an oath, Caesar had to be cautious and vigilant. Iradia's divine power was too bright, and it could easily cause problems. So he directly used the name of the Black Dragon's younger brother. Of course, to avoid inadvertently tricking Garin, this was not even the stupid dragon's full name, and the word Nephidicius was missing. The name did not match, so the contract naturally could not take effect. Caesar had expected this. He raised his head and pretended to be surprised, looking at the Count and Roy, waiting for the Brendel's reaction. Nina looked at him with a puzzled expression, as if she thought the problem was with Tangerine. But on the other side, Brendel and Roy showed an expression as if it was only natural. "Please forgive us, the situation is a little complicated." Then Roy smiled and bowed. "You know, we are now in a time of war, and we have to be careful at every step and be careful of hidden arrows from all angles." As they spoke, the two of them quickly changed their appearances, removing their disguises and turning into two military knights. "My apologies, sir. This is?" Caesar pretended to be puzzled and asked. "You may not know, but our enemy is sinister and cunning, powerful and vicious." The knight showed him the magic ring with the ability to transform, bowed and said, "In order to ensure absolute safety, we have no choice but to use this method to test your true identity." "You are humiliating me." Tangerine stood up and slammed his knuckles on the long table 3 times, with obvious anger. "This guy is getting into character. Please quell your anger, my lord. I'm sure you don't want your allies to be brainless and reckless." The knights knelt down on one knee and put their hands on their chests, saying, "We assure you that the terms of the previous agreement are all valid, and it was Count Brendel and Lord Roy who discussed it with you personally. We can use the link built by the mages to transmit information within a short distance." It was just like how Caesar spoke to Roy through the old wizard. "Now, please follow us, we will bring you to the real residence of the lords." Seeing that Tangerine's anger was gradually calming down, the knights praised him again, and took the lead to lift the curtain and stood outside, gesturing for him to enter. And so, under the knights' guidance, he once again boarded the carriage and went to the real camp of Commander Khaki. Chapter 144. After a few twists and turns, passing through a cramped dirt road that ran through sand, mud, and weeds, the troops stopped again in the black cedar forest. Count Brendel and Roy were already there waiting to receive them. Through the small window, he looked around and did not find any traces of a camp. There were few people here, the environment was harsh, and poisonous creatures were everywhere. It was hard to imagine that a lord would stay in this place. There were also very few guards around him, only a few dozen people, but they were all capable and seemed to be the trusted aides chosen from the loyal troops. Caesar got out of the carriage. "Welcome." Count Brendel looked the same as before, his eyebrows and clothes were the same, but in the assessment device, his ability value was only 5, much lower than the attendants around him. This time it should be a real person, right? Caesar thought. Without much formalities, the Brendel led him to a temporary straw hut and sat down. In the simple environment, they began to sign the contract and become allies. The content of the contract had been drafted long ago, and the Count had already written the name, Stein Brendel, waiting for Tangerine to arrive and hand it directly to him. Caesar took it, glanced at it, put it on the short table, and wrote Garin Tangerine again. Then he put the feather pen aside and stared at the Brendel's reaction. The contract still did not take effect. The Count paused, a trace of surprise and annoyance flashed in his eyes, but then he concealed it well and said with a smile, "Lord Tangerine, Brendel has shown full sincerity. Now it's your turn." "No," he said, "now it's your turn." The bonfire was burning, and a few bolts of lightning flashed across the gloomy sky. Roy slowly got up, and even he did not know why he took 2 steps back. He stared at the forest sprite that had been silent and weak, and his brows furrowed. What's going on? Suspicion filled his chest, and Count Tangerine's inexplicable words made him feel uneasy. "We've confirmed it." Roy tried to comfort himself. "Don't be so paranoid, listen to what this noble is going to say next." "What are you talking about?" "I've already signed my name to the God of Freedom. Now it's your turn. Please sign your real name, Your Excellency." The Count was slightly annoyed, but he still explained. "My true name is Caesar Ortoranzo Tangerine. Perhaps you have never heard of this name, but this voice, Roy." Count Tangerine had always maintained a gentle smile, but in this paragraph, his voice was gradually changing. From the elegant tone of an ordinary southern noble, he quickly turned into a deep, hoarse voice, "I think you should remember." The crackling of the bonfire echoed in the camp, as if the stones were responding to it. Roy gripped the hilt of the sword at his waist, his whole body shivering. "Black Dragon." Bang! Brendel also noticed the problem and quickly flipped over the short table in the straw hut. His trusted knights immediately reacted and swarmed over. "Send us away!" the Count shouted. At the same time, the spellcasters who had been standing silently behind him raised their staffs. None of the guards were slow to react. However, the dustless land. The illusory ripples not only dispelled the spellcasters' spells, but also destroyed all the magic items. Under the incredulous gazes of the people, a giant claw reached out from the smoke, and the huge black dragon stood with its head held high, occupying their entire vision. The first to die were the spellcasters. The great wizards, whose magic power was sealed, were as fragile as thin paper in front of the black dragon. They were smashed into a pile of mush by the sharp claws. Their flesh and blood were mixed together with the black robe, no longer distinguishable. Brendel wanted to escape, but he suddenly stopped after taking a step forward. His defensive items had lost their effectiveness, and endless flames surged and poured down on him. His screams were drowned out by the surging flames. In the next second, the Count's clothes and skin began to evaporate, and Stein Brendel fell down, instantly turning into charcoal. At the back, the deformed servants bared their fangs and claws and fought with the knights. Some of them wanted to escape and call for reinforcements, but they were immediately hit hard and swallowed by the flames. Whoosh! 1, 2, 3. A total of 3 poisonous arrows were shot towards the black dragon's mouth, eyes, and ears. However, none of them were effective. They were either engulfed by the flames in the air, blocked by the hard eye membrane, or sunk into the ears without causing any damage. At this time, only Roy could barely maintain his calm. He did not escape, knowing that no one could be faster than the black dragon. The Count's second son gripped the bronze sword hilt tightly, glanced at his brother who was too scared to move, and decided to take the risk. Instead of retreating, he charged towards the forest sprite who had been staying beside the black dragon. The scorching heat burned Roy's back like a raging inferno. He began to run, knowing that if there was anything that could help him find a way to survive, it could only be the forest sprite. I have to use it to threaten the black dragon. That was Roy's only thought. The knight beside him used his longsword to strike the deformed monster in front of him, but before he could find another opponent, the flames swept through his body, and he rolled on the ground, wailing in pain. Fire, fire everywhere, it was like a fiery hell. As he ran, the distance between them was quickly shortened. But just when he thought he was about to reach the forest sprite, the destructive flames swept past him, leaving a wide scorch mark on the ground. His hope was extinguished like a candle in the wind. I surrender. There was no other way. Roy decisively threw down his weapon and showed his empty hands to the enemy. He glanced at his brother who no one cared about and said, I surrender on behalf of the Brendel family. Let me live, and everything of Khakis will be yours from now on. Caesar looked down at the weak but powerful human, greedily enjoying the surging pleasure of being in control of life. I can work for you. If you give me a little support, I can control the entire Lion Kingdom, and use all the power of the kingdom to help you. Roy tasted the blood in his mouth, as well as the smell of cooked meat and ashes in the air, and said, I can swear to all gods that I will always be loyal to you, never take revenge, and never betray you. He waited for the black dragon's reply. But there was no reply. The huge black claw grabbed Roy's body, pinching, twisting twice. Blood and bones seeped out from the gaps between the claw and flowed down with the force of gravity. Previously, Caesar had hesitated for a moment, not because he was considering whether to let Roy live, but because he was considering whether he should pry the secret of the method to force others to swear loyalty to him. In the end, the black dragon gave up on this plan. Nothing was free. If you wanted to obtain unimaginable power, you would have to pay an unimaginable price. Some things that were beyond your knowledge were better not to be tainted. Since he didn't even know about it, he naturally wouldn't come to him if there was anything. Throwing away the flesh and blood that was no longer recognizable as a human, the black dragon opened his mouth and roared silently. In the blink of an eye, all the humans in the area were killed. Not a single fish escaped the net, and not a single person was left alive. Immediately after, the shape-shifting monsters that had settled down began to disguise themselves again, transforming into the appearance of the Brendel family members and knight attendants. Leave, I want to burn this place and destroy these traces. Caesar looked around and then said to the shape-shifting monster leader, Khaki, I'll leave the human affairs here to you for the time being. Listen to my orders and don't let me down. Please rest assured, Your Majesty. The clan leader disguised as Count Brendel knelt in front of him and kissed the black dragon's toes. Everything we have is yours. The flames surged like a volcano erupting, and the land was completely engulfed in flames. The black dragon's breath burned everything. After a long time, Caesar spread his wings and returned to his territory with the little guy clinging to his neck. End of Volume 1. Chapter 145. In order to reduce the noise and avoid trouble, Caesar tried to fly as high as possible, shuttling through the sea of clouds. Although the low oxygen and low pressure brought by the high altitude made him a little uncomfortable, it did not have any substantial effect on him. At this time, Caesar turned his head, ready to look at the condition of the little guy in the thorns on his back, but he found that the clouds in his vision suddenly froze, the air around his ears suddenly stopped, and everything was slowing down. Soon, his vision blurred, and he was pulled into the black dream that he had not explored for a while. At first, he still saw endless darkness, but as his vision shifted, Caesar immediately noticed a reddish light, which was eye-catching in the dark space, coming from the front of the display cabinet. Caesar began to move in that direction, and when the black dragon came closer and saw the trophy that suddenly appeared, his pupils shrank slightly. At the front of the display cabinet, there was a trophy that was close to 20 meters tall, taller than when he stood on his hind leg. Moreover, the trophy this time was not black jade. It was a reddish light gold, but in fact, the color was not uniform. The bottom of the trophy was dark, as black as ink like the midnight sea, but the top of the trophy was colorful, as if a whirlpool was flowing with vitality. Its shape was the same as before, but the surface was not smooth at all. Caesar bent his hooked toe and gently brushed it, feeling that the texture was like unpolished gravel, rough and rough. It was meaningless to argue about the material. After looking at it for a while, Caesar immediately bent down to observe the words that appeared on the base of the trophy. That was the most important thing. Avenger, a hatred was like a tumor in the heart, a poison in the throat that could not be removed, could not be forgotten, and could only be cleansed and healed by blood. Blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth. Reward: exoskeleton growth enhancement armor. Attachment: gene enhancement type 3, neurosensory connection, standard type power core. For the first time, there was an additional column in the introduction of the trophy, showing attachment. However, the introduction of the Black Dream's rewards had always been short, and could not be concise, so Caesar could only think and guess by himself. Fortunately, Caesar was already used to it. The overall color was different, but there was no doubt that this was a pure gold trophy, which was of a higher grade than black jade. Speaking of which, because of the many twists and turns during this period, the speed at which he obtained trophies was quite fast. It had to be known that in the same 7 years, Caesar and his brothers had guarded the hidden lake together for 7 years, and this guy had not even touched the tip of a trophy. However, in the second 7 years, the rewards he had obtained had already jumped from the bronze rank to the 3rd stage, touching the gold rank reward that he had never considered before. Looks like I still have to stir up more trouble, Black Dragon thought to himself. However, this kind of thinking was actually a little idealistic. Considering the uniqueness of the achievement rewards, it would only be more difficult for him to obtain trophies. The fact that no trophy had appeared for killing a strong enemy, the Green Dragon, was the best proof of this. After waiting for a while, Caesar realized that it could not find any other useful information at the base of the trophy. Caesar stretched out its right claw and touched the trophy. At this time, the originally shining and tall pure gold trophy's material became as soft as liquid, and was easily pierced through by the Black Dragon's sharp claws. After feeling the touch, it immediately surged and melted in an instant, turning into a ball of thick pure gold liquid. It quickly surged through Caesar's right front claw, gradually covering his entire body, and seeped into the pores between the gaps of his scales. Immediately after, the Black Dragon's body underwent a huge change. On his scales, a layer of shining steel like obsidian spread out, first wrapping around Caesar's torso, then spreading to his head amidst clanging sounds. The stratum corneum that had been deliberately formed in the past all degenerated at this moment, shrinking back into the body and disappearing completely, replaced by a harder and heavier armor. At the same time, the black dragon's wings, which were originally so huge that they were somewhat deformed, now began to shrink. With the cooperation of Caesar's autonomous allocation unit, the dragon's wings shrank to a normal state that suited him. Then, the wings were completely wrapped in a layer of pitch-black armor. Its bones became thicker and had a hard texture, while the edges became sharper. At the same time, many fine holes appeared, and the insides were spiral-shaped, so small that it was difficult for ordinary people to see them. Other than that, there were deeper changes. Inside the black dragon's body, a second heart appeared, condensing and forming in the chest cavity. On the surface, it looked exactly the same as a dragon's heart, but upon closer inspection, it was not an organ made of flesh and blood, but a completely dark red energy body. It was connected to a few tubes around it. The structure was simple, and the effect was clear. Its tubes were connected to the heart's blood vessels, transporting the energy flow to the new blood, turning the blood into a carrier and transportation tool for energy, circulating in the black dragon's body. Of course, Caesar was aware of all this, but he could not help but frown slightly. The armor only strengthened his strength and defense slightly, but Caesar's ability in this area was already very outstanding, and the armor itself was a super weapon. If the bio-enhancement armor only had these functions, it would not be of much use to him. However, Black Dream did not give a more detailed explanation. Even if the bio-enhancement armor had other functions, it would probably be up to him to figure it out, explore, and discover. The modification was completed. Caesar shook his head, recovering from the changes in his body, and lowered his head to stare at his claws. Although he did not know how much weight he had gained, he knew that his body had now become unimaginably heavy. Although the exoskeleton bio-enhancement armor had strengthened his strength and defense, in a sense, it was also a burden on the body, and required the support of a strong physique. No wonder there was Dragon Body Gene Enhancer Type 3 in the attachment. Seeing that he had received the reward, Caesar wanted to leave the dark space. The spotless land was a lesson learned, and it taught him that a lot of things could only be effective in the real world. He wanted to try and figure it out in Iradia. With this thought in mind, before Caesar could empty his mind, he saw a blur in front of his eyes, and his mind instantly left the black dream and returned to reality. However, he seemed to have forgotten one thing. He was high up in the sky. The black dragon's wings, which had already shrunk, and its weight, which had suddenly doubled, made it impossible for it to flap its wings to fly. Amidst the whistling of the air, the dragon instantly plummeted and began to fall vertically. The sudden change in direction and the sudden drop in altitude made little Luna, who was behind him, scream, but it was difficult to hear clearly, and was drowned out by the roaring hurricane as soon as it appeared. However, Caesar was still Caesar, and because of the connection between the nerves and the body, he quickly familiarized himself with the usage of the bio-enhancement armor. Although the sudden change in his consciousness from illusion to reality made him pause for a moment, Caesar quickly reacted and began to deal with the matter in front of him. The black dragon adjusted his body during the rapid descent, and in the next moment, a surge of dark red flames burst out between his wings, and a powerful thrust suddenly appeared, causing the guy's speed to increase by several times, and he once again soared into the sky. Chapter 146. Aha! In just 30 seconds, Caesar had completely fallen in love with this feeling. This was a brand new speed that he had never experienced before. Although it was not at the speed of sound, it was not far from it. At the very least, it would be easy to travel 1,000 miles in a day. After leaving the territory of the Northern Alliance, passing through the Theron Gobi, and crossing the monster Grand Canyon, this guy was completely overjoyed. He began to lower his altitude and gradually increased his speed to the limit. In fact, after reaching this speed, a large part of the kinetic energy produced by the armor was used to overcome the wind resistance. After all, the Black Dragon's current shape was not aerodynamic at all. If the body shape could be modified to the streamlined shape of a fighter jet in his previous life, the Black Dragon's speed might be even faster. However, Caesar did not care about this now. He looked down at the rolling mountains below and felt the strong airflow hitting his skin. For the first time since coming to Iradia, the emotion of happiness appeared in his mind. Yes, the first time. Caesar let out an unpleasant laugh from his throat, which then turned into a dragon's roar. The huge black dragon swept across the sky with a red tail, cutting through the clouds and leaving an eye-catching trail. Ah! Then, he heard a soft cry of surprise. When he turned around, the little one had been thrown far away. Thinking about it, in this state of extreme speed, the surface of Caesar's body was no less than being baptized by the storm. With Luna's strength, how could she hold on to him tightly? Then, Caesar quickly turned back and chased after the little one who was in free fall. Soon, he was side by side with Luna. Then, he opened his mouth and held her in his mouth. The black dragon continued to roar in the sky, causing thunderous airflow to rumble past. Half an hour later. Ha ha ha, Caesar was having a good time, but at this moment, the crimson flames that were constantly emitting from his wings suddenly flashed twice intermittently, emitting a few strange sounds of air flowing. Then, they were extinguished and there was no more sound. Black Dragon grinned, and his smug smile instantly froze. Only then did he realize that the Bio-Boost armor's neurosensory link had long sent out signals of energy exhaustion to Caesar's mind, but he didn't take it to heart. In the end, the current situation was simply out of gas. The Black Dragon controlled its wings to flap a few times, and its kinetic energy was exhausted. It began to descend rapidly, falling head first into the ground once more. Looking at the approaching land, Caesar gave up on thinking. He didn't choose to die. In fact, even if he didn't have the bio-boosting armor with this guy's strong physique, he estimated that he could withstand this degree of acceleration. Although he would be seriously injured in the end, it shouldn't be enough to kill him. Judging from the speed of this guy's recovery, as long as he was alive, everything would be fine. And now, this guy was actually deliberately exhausting the energy. First, he wanted to test how long the turbine propulsion could last under extreme conditions. Second, he wanted to find a way to replenish the energy. After all, this was not a single-use item that would be scrapped after a single use. Forced landing. The land was constantly magnified in the roaring hurricane. In Caesar's eyes, it was first the undulating terrain, then the vast mountains and plains. Then, he could clearly see the trees and rivers. In the end, every tree, every piece of gravel, and every bush was reflected in his eyes. Rumble. Amidst the howling winds and fierce collisions, the Black Dragon landed. This guy first crashed into a small slope, which directly collapsed the protrusion. He staggered in the air, rolled once, and then fell again. Like a meteor falling from the sky, countless trees and shrubs were crushed. The earth, wood, and stones along the way exploded, and he was even bounced up several times by the huge impact. In the end, he left a deep gully on the ground and still slid for a long distance before finally stopping. Fortunately, this guy landed on his stomach and didn't fall flat on his back. He could still maintain the dignity of a true dragon and not be unscrupulously mocked after being discovered. The Black Dragon blinked, lying on the ground, wagging his tail. He wasn't in a hurry to get up. Instead, he opened his mouth wide and prepared to let the little guy Luna out. "We're here." Luna covered her head, feeling dizzy. Even though she was protected in the Black Dragon's mouth, she was still dizzy when that guy was forced to land and roll. With great difficulty, she flapped her wings and barely managed to fly up. "We're here." Caesar still didn't get up, lying there and talking to her. "And we've already passed." Before, when they were in the high-speed airflow, Luna couldn't even open her eyes. Only after a while did she realize, "How did you become like this?" True dragon's self-transformation, you know. He had mentioned this to her before. After saying this, Caesar slowly stood up and shook off the dust and dirt on his body. The reason why he didn't move was because he was checking the delicate state of his organs after such a degree of impact, feeling the enhancement and strengthening brought to him by the bio-boost armor. Caesar was very satisfied with the result. Before obtaining the pure gold trophy, if he had fallen from such a height, he wouldn't have been on the verge of death, but he would have at least been seriously injured. Broken organs, broken tendons, and broken bones were all to be expected. But now, Caesar had only suffered some minor injuries, nothing serious. The bio-boost armor was still shining, flickering with a metallic and obsidian luster. Very good, Caesar thought. This degree had already exceeded his expectations. It would be an act to say that he wasn't happy. Of course, there was one point that this guy had overlooked. Although the bio-boost armor had played a major role in resisting the high-altitude impact, it also had the effect of the gene enhancement type 3 drug. It made Caesar's organs stronger, so much so that they hadn't been shattered by such an impact. After the inspection, just as he was about to bring Luna back to Blackwing's nest, Caesar's body suddenly surged with a strong sense of hunger. Speaking of which, in this young black dragon's 17 years of life, it wasn't that he hadn't been hungry before. But this time, the hunger was more intense than ever. His stomach seemed to be twitching, and there was a distorted feeling that it was about to digest itself. Caca. He couldn't care less. Filling his stomach was more important. Because he had sworn not to eat dirt again, Caesar grabbed a fallen tree from the side and swallowed it whole. When necessary, the stomach of a dragon could digest everything it ate, including dirt and wood. Although the nutrition was worrying, it could at least maintain their lives and satisfy their hunger. But this time was an exception. 2 trees were swallowed, but Caesar's stomach wasn't satisfied at all. This thing had no effect on him at all. The next second, the black dragon began to gnaw at the dirt, burying his head in the gully he had created before, swallowing all the black dirt that was covered in gravel and pebbles. Although eating dirt made Caesar feel a little better, the hunger was still there. This guy's consciousness was very good, so he quickly understood that his strength was still strong and his spirit was still full. So the feeling in his stomach wasn't hunger, but a signal transmitted by the bio-boost armor due to the lack of energy. It was a feeling similar to hunger. Thinking of this, he controlled his body and turned off the feedback from the bio-boost armor. The hunger disappeared as expected. Chapter 147. The Black Dragon, whose body had grown even larger, spread its legs and sat in the gully that it had created. It did not care about the little fellow who was circling around it and observing it curiously. Its claws lightly scratched its iron chin as it pondered about the matter of replenishing the biomass gear's energy. Just now, he had eaten a little more soil, and the feedback of energy deficiency had weakened a little. Although it was actually a drop in the bucket, the overall feeling was still very strong. But this phenomenon proved that eating soil was effective. But if he wanted to rely on eating soil to replenish his energy, he was afraid that he would have to die here and gnaw on the ground for a whole day. This efficiency was too low. There must be other more advanced alternatives, Caesar thought. Next, he went to hunt a fiery-maned bear. This kind of bear was very common in the northern wilderness. After roasting it, the meat was delicious. Although it was not as good as the Bismarck bull, it was still one of Caesar's regular meat dishes. Using the slender tail claws to handle the food, Caesar finished it quickly. He cut a piece of meat from the roasted bear leg and gave it to Luna. Then he swallowed the whole bear in 2 bites. Speaking of which, the little guy was originally a real vegetarian who only ate flour dew for food. But now, she was also influenced by the black dragon to eat meat. Little Luna hid in the corner, squinting her eyes like a squirrel and chewing slowly. After eating a whole fiery-maned bear, Caesar activated the feedback from the biomass gear. The strong feeling of hunger surged again, and it was not relieved. It seems that red meat is not working, he thought. Meat was not working, but soil was. What was in the soil? Humus? Microbes? Minerals? Minerals? Caesar figured it out. After trying to use plants and animals, this was the only thing he could think of. However, minerals were actually a very general concept. If he wanted to confirm it, he would have to try it step by step. This was the energy source of the biomass gear, and it was the most important thing at the moment. Caesar, of course, had to study it thoroughly first. Of course, if he had to do this alone, it would probably take a lot of time and he would be exhausted to death. Fortunately, he had a large number of followers in the territory that were on standby at any time. Let's go home. After finding the direction of the experiment, the black dragon shouted to the forest fairy and returned. How dare they talk about stopping the war just like that? How arrogant! Seeing the messenger leave, Balasai Lane held his sword with one hand and knocked heavily on the table with the other. Then, he took a sip of the white porcelain teacup and finally said, "As long as we defend to the death, no matter how strong and fearless their soldiers are, they won't be able to take even half a step forward." And in a short period of time, the Brendel family will not be able to digest the territories, and sooner or later they will be dragged down. Grand Duke Lionheart pondered for a moment, analyzing the pros and cons of the battle. Now that the battle had reached this point, the two sides had already shed all pretense of cordiality. If one didn't die, then it would be very difficult to negotiate a truce. As the Grand Duke and King Lion, Baelish Lion was over 50 years old, but he was as strong as a young man in his 20s. If Caesar were here, he would find that this guy was not only a great noble, but also a powerful knight. Even if he was sitting, the Grand Duke still looked tall and strong. His legs were long, his shoulders were broad, and his stomach was flat. Although his arms were thin, his muscles were firm, and he did not have the usual fat and greasy appearance of a noble. The current Duke Lionheart was a decisive person, so he shaved off the beard around his lips and chin, and did not leave any facial hair on his cheek. Only a head of lush golden hair could be seen. I received news a few days ago that the Brendel family has found an ally. A great noble from a trading city in the central region, and that person may provide assistance to the Brendel family. The vassal nobles who stood beside him thought for a moment and said, "Moreover, they offered to give back half of their land in exchange for a truce." From the looks of the messenger, the Brendel family would be willing to give them more concessions. This condition was tempting enough. "Your people are simply bullshit." Grand Duke Lionheart's posture was like an angry lion. "Do you think they will still propose a truce after receiving assistance?" A self-contradictory paradox. No matter what, their concession of returning the land is real. Another noble said, "Your Grace, our rear is becoming more and more chaotic. All of our troops have been transferred to the front lines, and we no longer have the strength to suppress the rebellious serfs. To be honest, we can't delay this war for much longer than the Brendel family. Moreover, the enemy's soldiers are too fierce and cruel, and our troops are very weak. Your Grace, we think that the best choice now is to temporarily stop the war, take back the land, and then persuade the other countries. Wait for your allies to send troops, and then eliminate the rebels in one fell swoop." His vassals suggested one after another. Coincidentally, these words were exactly the same as what Caesar had said to the mutated monsters 2 days ago. Black Dragon had also proposed the concept of befriend those who are far away and attack those who are near. He had told the mutated monsters that after the situation had stabilized, they had to act steadily according to this theory. In Caesar's eyes, the khaki territory was a very important part of his forces. The Black Dragon could directly influence the humans through this territory, so he was quite concerned about this place. Lionheart's expression was uncertain. His eyes swept over each of the vassal nobles, and after thinking for a long time, he finally spat out a word. Fine! The year 1634 of the Iradia's third era. This year was as peaceful as ever, but for the Northerners, it was indeed a year worth remembering. In 1633, the Lion Kingdom's civil war was on the verge of breaking out. The Brendel family rose to power, and at the beginning of 1634, the situation completely escalated to white hot. The flames of war burned every corner of the kingdom, and even spread to the neighboring countries' territories. However, just when the people thought that the Brendel family's momentum was like a rainbow, and that they would fight until the Lion Kingdom's capital was under siege, the Brendel family suddenly admitted defeat. Not only did they request for peace talks with Lionheart, but they also gave up half of the territory that they had painstakingly conquered in exchange for a moment of respite. This puzzled the rulers of the various countries. But no matter what, the return of peace was a good thing for the people. The Brendel family's initiative to give in was seen as being inspired by the good God, and it improved their reputation among the commoners. There was nothing new under the sun, and the topic of the Northern Alliance ended there. Let's take a look at the external news brought by the adventurers. In the distant green capital, where the Northern Alliance's expedition failed, a war also broke out. It was said that the situation was even worse than the Lion Kingdom's civil war, and it was extremely tragic. The main army under the Mother of Poison, the Ogre clan, was completely wiped out, and their traces were wiped out in the wilderness. This war was called the War of the Two Dragons by the Northerners, and it was recorded in some historical records about dragons. The final winner of the war was a black dragon. This news came from a famous prophet in the Northern Alliance, and according to the erroneous descriptions spread by the adventurers, the dragon had 4 wings, a back full of eyes, and could use 5 types of breath: ice, fire, lightning, acid, and poison. However, until now, there had not been any information about the dragon's portrait that had been leaked. However, it was easy to imagine that the dragon's power must be stronger than the old green dragon to be able to defeat the Mother of Poisons. Perhaps it was an extremely old black dragon or even an ancient dragon. The people were always guessing and talking about the giant dragon that represented wealth and power. During the discussion, they gave it a name that was even more exaggerated than the Mother of Poison, the Dragon King, and the dragon language and elven language translated it as Emperor. Of course, if the other party was a kind and neutral metal dragon or gem dragon, it would never be able to get such an ostentatious name. But for the greedy and cruel Pentashade dragons, the people were not stingy with giving them the most exaggerated and shocking names. They could not wait for the stupid Pentashade dragons to kill each other and fight to the death for a name. Chapter 148. The current situation in Blackwing's lair was much more stable than Caesar had imagined. The only problem was that after the Mother of Poisons fell into eternal slumber, the enslaved subterranean dwellers fled one after another, causing the production here to come to a complete standstill. The new Blackwing's lair faced a long period of food shortage. Fortunately, Hogg was not completely helpless about this. Under the premise of allowing the various clans to spread out and hunt in the surrounding areas, the Jackallan leader also contacted the wild boar people in the Underdark to slaughter the animals that were originally raised in the underground world. They pulled a long supply line and transported them to the newly developed territory to stock up on supplies. When Caesar returned, the Jackallans and the wild boar people had just completed the transfer of a new batch of supplies. The black dragon's movements were very loud. His footsteps had long been heard, echoing in the dark forest. The Jackallans thought that they were under attack and held their weapons, ready for battle. As the distance closed, the forest could no longer hide the huge black dragon. The spikes on his back and wings emerged from the canopy, like the protruding dorsal fin of a shark. Then, Caesar squeezed through the layers of obstacles, completely occupying their entire field of vision amidst the hoarse cries of the trees and shrubs. Your Majesty. Hogg held the legendary weapon in his hand, bloodthirst. Looking at the black dragon's scarlet eyes, his originally tense body gradually relaxed. After a pause, he knelt on one knee. Your family has been waiting for your return. The addition of the bio-boost armor had caused considerable changes to Caesar's body, but it was not to the point of being unrecognizable. At least, it was much easier to recognize the changes than the last time in the Underdark. The Jackalan leader was already experienced, so it only took a little time to confirm the identity of the black dragon who had suddenly appeared. You're transferring supplies from the Underdark? Caesar glanced at the wild boar people who stood silently and solemnly, then looked at the supplies piled up on the cart. He quickly understood what was going on and asked. Yes, Your Majesty, Hogg said. Those cavemen fled in all directions, unwilling to serve Blackwing's nest. We taught them a lesson with clan blood, but it was still ineffective. I understand. Caesar nodded. It was not that he did not allow Hogg to transfer resources from the Underdark. The Black Dragon had always treated the Underdark as his own logistics base, and that was its purpose. However, Theron Gobi was a long way from here, and they had to go around a pass like Mustel. It was easy to be attacked and cut off. Once Blackwing's nest became dependent on him, this problem would become a huge hindrance to Caesar if a war broke out. This was not a long-term plan. He had to farm. Not to mention export trade, at the very least, they had to be self-sufficient. However, Caesar was still at a loss on how to implement it. After all, his experience and understanding of territory construction and operation was limited to some games and movies. When it came to actual operation, there were many details that he could not grasp. Since I can't figure it out, I'd better solve my current problem first, he thought. Caesar yawned and no longer cared about Hogg and the wild boar man. He went straight back to the Emerald Palace and brought the little fellow to the treasury left behind by the previous ruler of the Green Capital. Whether it was gold, silver, gems, or high-grade magical metals, they could all be categorized as minerals. If he wanted to find a way to force the armor to replenish its energy, Caesar would definitely come to this place to take a look first. The dragon's gold and silver were piled up like mountains as usual, and the magical items were still the same as when he left, neatly displayed in crystal containers. Ever since Caesar opened the treasury and brought a batch of wealth to the northern countries, no one had entered this place. Even if the Black Dragon did not deliberately issue an order, his dependents regarded the entire palace as a forbidden area and did not dare to set foot in it. Looking at the various magical items, Caesar subconsciously thought of the transformation necklace from before. Unfortunately, it had been destroyed. As the closest magical item to the Black Dragon, the transformation necklace had completely disintegrated and collapsed the moment it appeared in the dustless land. It was then digested by the dragon's furnace-like stomach, and had long disappeared without a trace. To be honest, Caesar felt a little regretful. This item was very useful to him, at least in the case of sneaking into the northern countries, but now it had disappeared just like that. The dustless land was like a flood and ferocious beast that did not distinguish between friend and foe, and showed no mercy. Fortunately, although the transformation necklace was also a magical item, it was not rare in Iradia. It could be seen from the fact that the Brendel family could take out 2 transformation rings to test it. The craftsmanship of this treasure was not difficult. If there was a need, Caesar could still get it from the humans if he spent some time and effort. However, the root of the problem was not the transformation necklace. It was now very clear that all magical items in his hands would have their effectiveness reduced and their abilities plummeted. They could also become disposable items and be sacrificed heroically in battle. Under these circumstances, if the Black Dragon still insisted on using magical items, he would probably go bankrupt sooner or later. Putting aside the idle chatter for now, Caesar looked around. First, he stared at the gold that the true dragons regarded as their lives. He stuck out his curled and forked tongue, hooked a piece of gold from the wall-like pile, and chewed. In the end, the taste was unexpectedly good. The gold nugget tasted like white chocolate in his previous life. It was hard in the mouth, but it quickly became soft and sweet. It was very charming, silky, and refreshing, and the black dragon couldn't stop. He wondered if other dragons would have the same taste as Caesar when they swallowed the gold nugget. After chewing for a while, Caesar swallowed the gold nugget. His expression then turned serious as he carefully sensed the feedback from the forced armor through the nerve and body connection. For the first time, the feeling of starvation and lack of energy was greatly reduced. After the gold nugget entered Caesar's stomach, it was broken down and absorbed at a speed that the black dragon could not understand. The particles flowed into the second crimson heart in his chest, and were transformed into energy that flowed through his body through his blood. It was effective. Caesar smacked his lip. This result was actually within his expectations. The black dragon slowly lay on the ground and sensed the feedback from his body. He carefully recorded how much energy a pure, solid gold nugget the length of a human palm could give him. After a rough estimate, he tried silver, copper, iron, and even more metals one by one. He found that they were all equally effective, but there was a clear difference in the conversion efficiency. The conversion efficiency of minerals like copper, iron, and even diamond was very low, less than half that of gold. Magical metals like adamantine and mithril, on the other hand, were a level higher than ordinary metals. After a small piece was converted, it could output a lot of energy in the Crimson Heart. It was a very good supplement. Chapter 149. The Black Dragon swallowed 3 gold bars, 2 large handfuls of silver ornaments, and a small pinch of adamantine and mithril. Only then was he truly full. His biomass gear had received an unprecedented replenishment and was ready to go, transmitting a powerful feedback. What a headache! Caesar came to a realization. He would probably have to eat gold for a living in the future, and the higher the conversion efficiency of the metals, the more valuable they would be to Iradia. In that case, if Blackwing's lair was unable to generate any income in the future, he might not even be able to feed himself. It was fortunate that it was him. If it were any other true dragon, upon discovering that the biomass enhancement armor could be replenished in such a manner, they would probably burst into tears. In the end, they would either have to give up on this ability or choose death. Regardless, Caesar was still in a rather good mood after finding a source of conversion replenishment. Thus, the black dragon hummed an unpleasant tune as he glanced at the old green dragon preserved in the compartment. He was still not at ease, so he applied another layer of ice breath before leaving with his tail wagging. He exited the treasury and closed the door. Although this magical door mixed with mithril was now completely reduced to an ornament, as long as the black dragon was still around, no creature would dare to step into this place. But he had to be careful of those adventurers. Yes, be careful of those thieves, bandits and robbers. No one knew what this fellow was thinking, but his expression suddenly became ferocious. He bared his teeth, puffed up his cheeks, and nodded repeatedly. Now, these treasures were no longer just treasures. They were also his spiritual sustenance, his source of energy, and Caesar's lifeblood. Anyone who dared to covet them would be skinned and hanged. The forest sprite looked at the black dragon's inexplicable change in expression, confused. Fortunately, she knew that Caesar would occasionally behave in such a strange manner. She could tell that the black dragon was in a rather good mood. Then let's play a game of cards, Luna thought excitedly. She ran into her small house, took out the iron box that she regarded as a treasure, and begged Caesar to play 2 rounds with her. Caesar agreed. Thus, in the Emerald Palace, the 2 of them sat on the ground without hesitation. In fact, Luna was floating, while Caesar was lying down, and the forest fairy faced the Black Dragon Lord. Now that he was faced with the problem of how to make money, Caesar subconsciously thought when he was playing cards. Was it possible to make the entire set of cards and sell it to the outside world to make money? There was an answer. In Eladia, the target group of this card was not only teenagers or even humans. It was also targeted at long-lived species that lived long lives but often lived dull and boring lives, such as dragons, elves, fairies, and so on. In Iradia, where time was abundant but entertainment activities were extremely scarce, such a card would probably explode in popularity the moment it appeared. Those who had a certain status and did not lack wealth would probably be addicted to it and have a lot of fun playing it. See Luna for details. As long as he put in a lot of money and effort in the early stages, embedding a mass energy crystal in the card, and then using magic to record images and sound effects, oh gods above, to be honest, even Caesar did not know what kind of effect it would have or how much money it would make if he did this. Not only would this solve his problem of eating, it might even bring him a huge trophy of wealth. And if he marked the back of the card with the mark of Blackwing's nest, he might even get a reputation reward. Damn you! You really are a genius. This black dragon became more and more excited the more he thought about it. Looking at Luna, who was concentrating on how to play the card, he could not help but stick out his tongue and lick the little one. Aya! Luna cried out in surprise. She could not even hold the card firmly with her magic. After stabilizing her weak magic with great difficulty, she said angrily, "You must have done it on purpose. I have already calculated how to play the card. You will definitely lose this round. But I can't remember now." She frowned her little eyebrows and put on a bitter face. She began to study again. She did not care much about the black dragon's licking. Previously, whenever they were in danger, Caesar would often suck her into his mouth. Luna was already used to it. Of course, the vision was beautiful, but to really realize it, Caesar still had to face many practical problems. The cost was easy to solve. The black dragon, who had obtained green capital and khaki, could be considered a moderately rich man. It was not to the extent that he could not even create a few sets of cards with mass energy crystals. Moreover, Caesar had knowledge beyond the times. If he really started to produce, he could even create a batch of assembly line workshops. There was no need to worry about the manufacturing cost, efficiency, and so on. The key to the problem was the copyright. It must be known that card games were not difficult products. They were not like those precious magic items, where each item needed to be carefully crafted, extremely difficult to forge, and could not be replicated. But for the cards in Luna's hands, after knowing the specific gameplay and rules of the game, Iradia had countless creatures with the ability to produce them. As long as someone came with 2 thick sheets of paper and a few artists, they would be able to produce a decent imitation. And those powerful lords would be able to produce high-end products that were even better than Caesar's. Iradia was not developed, but the creatures here were not stupid. The idea was good, but after it was produced, how to protect the product was something that Caesar had to think of ways to solve. Otherwise, before he could earn any money, the competing products would have already spread across the entire continent. Furthermore, if he did not take it for granted and considered the details, Caesar still had to solve the first step of the problem of sales. Under normal circumstances, the other intelligent races would not even want to touch a set of strange cards with the name of Blackwing's nest on it, and the label came from a 5-colored evil dragon. They would subconsciously treat it as an evil dragon's bewitchment and sweep it into the trash. How to reverse the deviation in perception was also a big problem. Iradia did not have a precedent that Caesar could use as a reference. With so many troubles popping up one after another, he suddenly felt that his brain was not enough. "Your Majesty!" Just as Caesar was daydreaming and playing cards with Luna, he suddenly heard a respectful whisper from outside the palace. He shifted his body and turned his head. He found that the wyvern leader, Erha, had appeared outside the palace without him knowing. Behind him was a group of trembling shapeshifters. "Your Majesty, they trespassed on the edge of the palace without permission. I wanted to kill them, but these guys said that they were following orders and had completed your orders." Erha looked up at him. After receiving Black Dragon's permission, he pushed his wings and hind legs a few steps to the right to let the shapeshifters in. "Your Majesty, after you left, we immediately started collecting things in Khaki Hill and brought the things you wanted." The shapeshifters dragged a few large boxes and knelt in front of Black Dragon. Their leader did not come this time, so he was probably very worried. The things that humans did were enough for him to slowly understand and absorb. When the boxes were opened, there were not expensive treasures or magical items, but some ordinary book. Luna floated over curiously to take a look. "The God we believe in elemental power, from beginner to master, a brief history of the continent, the forging of magical items, adventurer's guide, survival wisdom of Bismate monster, illustrated handbook, Schiller's selected poems, immortal sun, never sets lords, self-cultivation." The little fellow was confused at first, then surprised, and finally suspicious. After the shapeshifters bowed and left, she asked, "No way. Caesar, what are you going to do with these human books? Are you a collector?" "No." Black Dragon said righteously, "I love learning. Learning makes me happy." He had been longing for these things for too long. Because of his lack of common sense, he had suffered many losses in Iradia. He could not bear the life of an illiterate person anymore. Moreover, establishing a complete knowledge and cognition system would help him think about the problems that he could not solve at present. Maybe he could come up with some solutions. This was one of the reasons why Caesar tried so hard to control Khaki. Without the power of the upper nobles on the human side, he really did not know how to get such a large number of precious books. Even if Black Dragon was willing to pay, it would be very difficult to get in touch with humans through the shapeshifters and trade with magical items. Ordinary merchants could not get such a complete set of books. Chapter 150. Ineffective. This was the 11th time that Caesar had followed the instructions of elemental power, from beginner to master, and tried to perform the most basic beginner level of cantrips. Unfortunately, the scene was still in an awkward silence. Damn it. Even Luna could easily perform such a useless level 0 cantrip. Even the forest sprite with a combat power of only 2 could easily perform it. Caesar was completely discouraged. Either the book was fake, or the dragon was a fake dragon. Either way, one of the two was fake and did not exist. In fact, the situation had already proven this point, but Caesar did not give up. The cause of the matter was the formation of the crimson heart in his chest. This guy accidentally discovered that he could manipulate the flow of energy like a spellcaster manipulating magic power. This reignited Caesar's hope. He tried to use the flow of energy as magic power and tried to perform a spell. The result was terrible. The black dragon could not raise his head. The crimson energy and elemental magic power were not the same substance. It was like the difference between water and honey wine. No matter how much water one drank, it would not make one drunk. It would only make one full. So angry. However, although the crimson energy and elemental magic power were different in nature, they could be categorized under the general concept of abnormal abilities. Caesar pondered. Although it was impossible to make the crimson energy and elemental magic power have the same effect through spellcasting, it did not mean that it was a death sentence and had no effect. For this reason, Caesar purposely flipped through all the books related to abnormal powers, including but not limited to elemental power, the origin of magic, the wizard's journey, the 4 ways to cast fireball, and so on. He began a 2-week-long in-depth study. The result made him feel even worse. After exploring, Black Dragon discovered that mana, magic, came from the elemental tide, and the elemental tide could be categorized as an idealistic force. Its principles were unknown, but its effects were obvious. In Iradia's theoretical works, everyone guessed that it was highly likely to come from the spirit. To Caesar, studying the mind was no less than a form of torture. It reminded him of the time when he asked Blakesia and Garin about the principles of spells when he was young. Blakesia and Garin kept talking about instinct and thought control. Forget it, Caesar thought bitterly. In fact, this research was not completely fruitless. He discovered that although the crimson energy in his body could not be transformed into an external form like mana, it could still produce effects within his body. Under precise control and when the body could bear the load, it could instantly increase the power output of a group of muscles in the body, resulting in a power outburst that far exceeded the limit of the past. In an instant, his strength would increase by almost 50%. With Caesar's foundation, such an increase was extremely terrifying. He might even be able to kill a dragon with one punch. If Iradia did not have fancy magic, but instead had the combat aura that was multiplied to the peak, Caesar might have thought that the energy flow produced by the Crimson Heart was the same as that thing. Unfortunately, it was not. On the other hand, the information sent by the shape-shifting monster organization was extremely complete. Caesar spent a long time before he finally finished half of the book. At this time, he could not help but be grateful for his dragon body. The energy and memory of a true dragon was far beyond what humans could reach. Their energy was as endless as nuclear energy, and the almost photographic memory strengthened Caesar's ability to obtain feedback, giving him more motivation to continue reading the long books that were originally difficult to finish. If Luna did not look for him, this guy would probably stay in his nest until he finished reading all these books. What? You want to leave? No way. After hearing the little one's words, the black dragon's eyes widened, and 2 puffs of white smoke came out of his nose. You forgot that you belong to me now. You have to wait until I have the ability to sense before you leave. With the contract as proof, the gods will not allow you to break the contract. I've been fooled. You were lying to me at that time. Luna ran behind Caesar and wagged his tail. And I'll just leave for a little while. Just a little while, and I'll be back soon. After a laborious explanation, the unhappy black dragon finally understood. It turned out that the little one was homesick. The forest fairies were not cold-blooded pentashade dragons. Although they would mostly live alone or with their partners after they reached adulthood, the fairies would still stay in the same family with their parents before they reached adulthood. Luna was obviously still underage, according to the forest fairies' calculation, and it had been a full 8 years since she left home and went to the outside world. Even if the forest fairies were long-lived species like the true dragons, it was still a long time. The little one was born in a normal fairy family. At this time, her parents were probably starting to get anxious and worried about her whereabouts. And now that Caesar had gotten his revenge and the black dragon's lair was stabilizing and there were no pressing matters, little Luna had the idea to try and see if the big black dragon would agree to let her go home. I see. Caesar scratched the armor on his stomach, then lowered his head and carefully observed the expression on the little one's face. You really want to go? Oh, I'm just going back to take a look. I won't run away. Luna begged pitifully, then raised 2 fingers. Just 2. Seeing that Caesar's expression was not good, she quickly put away another finger and changed her words. Just 1 month. Her home was in the elven forest to the east of the wilderness. It was not far from here and was actually quite close. It could be considered a neighbor to the current black dragon's lair, otherwise she would not have bumped into the black dragon the moment she left home. Wait a moment. The black dragon thought for a moment and said in a low, muffled voice. He then left the unimaginably large study and went to another compartment in the Emerald Palace. He opened the door to the treasury and started rummaging through the pile of magical items. After about 30 seconds, he took out a necklace and handed it to Luna, saying, "Take it, I'll give it to you." The ice vein necklace could be activated automatically when the user was injured, creating a frost armor that lasted for 1 minute. Its effect was close to that of a great mage's defensive spell. To be honest, this item was not considered a high-end item in the Green Dragon's collection, but it had the advantage of having a sizable characteristic. Even Luna's small body could use it easily, changing automatically and being convenient to carry around. It was not that Caesar did not allow Luna to go home. This was a sentiment shared by most kind and neutral intelligent creatures, so it was understandable. It was just that the forest fairy's individual abilities were too weak, and Luna was prone to daydreaming and making stupid mistakes. He was worried that she would run into danger or bad people on her way home. He did not consider that there were not many bad people in Iradia who were more evil than the Black Dragon. Chapter 151. The weather was clear. After passing through the crisscrossing mountains and barren plains, Caesar set foot on this land. The climate in the east was even more pleasant than green. The warm wind carried with it the scent of flowers and earth, as well as the rich smell of grass. He couldn't go any further. In front of him was the vast elven forest. The environment here was more primitive than Caesar had imagined, and it was full of shocking power. The towering green-crowned trees stretched endlessly to the other side of the sky. They were intertwined with each other, rippling with the smell of magic, forming the first pass of the elven forest. Many kind and neutral species lived here. This place didn't welcome evil species like the Black Dragon. Even the environment was like this. "We're here." Luna came down from Caesar's neck. She wrinkled her little nose and smelled the familiar smell, revealing a smile. After arriving at the elven forest, Caesar could basically relax. The elven forest was a gathering place for good races. It was very difficult for some creatures with evil hearts to survive in there. Once they were discovered, they would be hunted down and killed. Unprovoked wars caused by opposing factions were the main theme of Eladia. "I'll come back to find you in a little while." Just a little while, which is the time it takes for you to sleep. Luna stared at the green-crowned forest for a while before running back to hug the Black Dragon's leg. Unfortunately, the difference in size was too great. She couldn't even hug Caesar's forelimbs completely. However, the little fellow still hugged him with peace of mind. She pressed her face against his scales and said, "You have to be good. Don't run off to fight again. Rest for a while first." She knew that it was almost impossible to completely persuade a chromatic dragon. As a true dragon, the chromatic dragon's blood was full of natural instability and tyrannical desire to conquer. This was the foundation set by the chromatic dragon queen. Nature could not be changed. Luna knew that she couldn't persuade Caesar, nor did she plan to. She only asked him to rest for a while first. She didn't want to wait until she came back and didn't even know where the dragon had gone. "I know." Caesar nodded. He then grabbed a cloth bag with a communication crystal and handed it to her. "Take this. If you need anything, call me. Crush it and send a message." "Yes." The little fellow took it and used her transcendence energy to drag it, nodding gently. In fact, Luna was in a good mood. Her joy of returning home was beyond words, but when she saw Caesar talking to her so seriously, she became a little sad for some reason. Weak, intelligent creatures," Caesar harumphed and urged her. Then, he watched as the little fellow flapped her wings and dragged a large bag of communication crystals into the wild green field. Her figure disappeared. "Follow him." He spoke to the air, and as soon as his voice fell, the transparent vision turned slightly yellow, revealing the figures of a group of battle lizardmen. At the same time, the wyverns flapped their wings and descended from the sky. The soil around their feet was turned up, and the ankhegs respectfully prostrated themselves. "Protect her until you see her family." Caesar did not look at them. Instead, he stared at the green field in front of him and muttered, "Also, you have other missions. Go and find out more about the races living in the elven forest. If Blackwing's nest wants to expand, it cannot avoid this area." "But, Your Majesty," the wyvern muttered softly, This is the Elven Forest, a forbidden area for the evil races. Even the Mother of Poison did not touch this place back then and started a war with the races inside. Most of the creatures in the Elven Forest lived in idyllic seclusion. They did not care about the outside world, so they were not much of a threat. However, it was extremely difficult to gnaw on them. Therefore, even the arrogant Lord of Green Capital did not show his claws and fangs in this place. However, Caesar was different. As far as he knew, the Elven Forest had a lot of magical minerals. They were all the food he needed. Moreover, once he captured this place and enslaved a group of kind races, it would be a great help to his future card plan. The Elven Forest. Is there a defensive barrier outside? Caesar turned around and looked at it. No, your majesty. This wyvern was not as smart as the husky. It did not think about the meaning of Black Dragon's words and answered systematically. Then what are you waiting for? The Black Dragon Lord's voice became rough. The subordinates did not dare to speak. They all activated their abilities and quickly merged into the green forest, following little Luna. When the figures of the monsters were about to disappear from sight, Caesar whispered, "Nero, my king." The leader of the demon dogs slowly revealed his head from behind the hill. Hearing the black dragon call him, he jumped lightly and nimbly arrived beside Caesar. "Did you hear what I said before?" Caesar asked. When the demon dog nodded, he continued, "Follow them. If they can't do it, tear them apart." Actually, Caesar could ask Luna about the situation in the Elven Forest, but he did not want to. After bidding farewell to the forest fairies, Caesar returned to Blackwing's nest. He began to arrange the matters of replenishing the tribe in the territory. He called Hog and Gaul over. If they wanted to develop well, they had to take root here. If the land was not good, they could reclaim it. The area that was burned was just right. If the environment was not good, they could rebuild it. But without a tribe, everything was just empty talk. Take your wolf pups and run outside. Go and catch some gnomes. Have the husky cooperate with you. Catch as many as you can. I want them all," Caesar said. He had done some research in the past few days. Although gnomes were a dirty, inferior species, and chaotic, they had outstanding advantages. They generally had a talent for making inventions. As long as they were managed well, independently, they could become a good research team. Moreover, some of the gnomes that grew askew, and there were quite a few of them, even knew how to forge weapons. Caesar was unable to recruit the powerful dwarves at the moment, so he needed gnomes to play a role. After Hog accepted his orders and left, the black dragon turned to Gaul, his tone slightly gentler. "Can you contact the Torrents?" Blackwing's nest now relied solely on the wild boar people's breeding industry in the Underdark. Sooner or later, it would become a bottleneck for development. They needed to find other means of supply. Farming was the most important. A long time ago, Caesar had set his sights on the Torrents. However, at that time, they were in a period of war. His dependents could not be in two places at the same time, so he had put it on hold. Now, he had finally put it on the agenda. Different methods had to be used to deal with different tribes. The Torrens were not like the gnomes. They were descendants of the ancient Orc Empire and had inherited the orcs, never be a slave. Therefore, it was impossible to kidnap a Tauren tribe by force alone. Fortunately, they had a close relationship with the orcs. Caesar could rely on the orcs to persuade the Torrens to work for him. "I can't contact them," Gaul replied with certainty. The Stone Crow clan was originally a small tribe in the wilderness. Other than the illogical Archmage save, everything else was in line with the normal ecology of a small tribe. Naturally, it was impossible for them to have connections other than their own. The only contact they had was the Flying Ape clan, which was driven by the Black Dragon's summer grass trade. "But we can look for them, your majesty," the orc leader added dryly. For some reason, Caesar thought that after killing the green dragon, destroying Brendel, and completing his revenge, the Stone Crow clan's depressed mood would be somewhat relieved and they would become more optimistic. In the end, not only did they not feel that way, they became even more rigid and silent. In Hogg's report, the orcs almost never interacted with other tribes except for the occasional contact with the gnolls and wild boars. They would do whatever the black dragon told them to do. The 2 sentences Gaul said in front of Caesar today were probably equivalent to all the words this orc leader said in an entire day. Chapter 152. After arranging the matter of accepting new species, the black dragon waited for the gnolls and orcs to leave before lying flat on the ground again. He wagged his tail in boredom and stared blankly at the empty emerald palace. The little girl had left, so Caesar was not worried about her safety. Although the battle lizardmen diggers and the demon hound leader had not returned, she had already contacted the black dragon and said that she had successfully returned to the secret tree hole in the elven forest fairy's house to meet her parents. The first day of Luna's absence, Caesar stared at the empty treetop fortress and was stunned for a long time before he came back to his senses. After thinking about it, he was ready to go outside. To be honest, this guy was really lazy. He was not a responsible lord at all. After returning, he had not even patrolled his own territory. At least he should go out and show his face, Caesar realized. Later, he also planned to go to the Underdark. After all, he had not gone back since he arrived on the surface. Everything was handled by Hogg and Angalmo. Even if there was no important news, it was still his own logistics base. He should go back and take a look. The black dragon stood up and crawled out of the palace. After such a long time, his family had already digested the remnants of the green capital and established a new territorial structure with the characteristics of Blackwing's nest. The perimeter of the treetop fortress was a high-pressure isolation zone. It was only the residence of the battle lizardmen and the wyverns. As the descendants of the dragons, they naturally became the guards of the Black Dragon Lord. Caesar also intended to let these guys be independent and close to his deterrence range. They would not mix with other clans. It was clear that these fellows had spent quite a bit of effort on their new residence. It was rare for the lizardmen to be so diligent. They dug through the river and drew a tributary from the river beside Blackwing's nest. They built a small pool that made them feel happy. They lived and bred in that place, living a semi-aquatic life. Wyverns, on the other hand, were tree-dwellers. Around the treetop fortress, one could see that there were wyvern nests built on the larger, luxuriant, ancient trees. Those nests were created by the wyverns using their saliva to glue together branches and stones. They were about 2 meters in size and spanned 2 to 3 branches of the large tree. In front of the treetop fortress was a dirt road opened by the orcs and gnolls. After choosing a place, they cut down all the surrounding trees and shrubs and made fences and piled them up on both sides. Fortunately, the road was wide and eye-catching enough to allow 2 adult horse-gate lizards to walk side by side. Otherwise, in the dark forest, it would be difficult for Caesar's family to find this path. There was only one path leading to the treetop fortress. Normally, if one wanted to meet the Black Dragon Lord, they would have to pass through this path. In other places, the twin-legged flying dragons and battle lizardmen maintained the strictest surveillance. Any beasts or monsters that came out of the forest would be treated as intruders and would be attacked and killed. The reason why the shape-shifting monsters had almost been killed was because of this. Arriving at the periphery of the isolation zone, the control was much looser. This was the habitat and activity area of most of the Black Dragon's family. The various clans maintained a scattered state, scattered all over the dark forest. Some clans did not get along with each other and hated each other, so their habitats were far apart, such as the gnolls and the shadow manticores. Some clans rarely got along and would gradually start to integrate, such as the orcs and some wild boar people that were stationed on the surface world. If one continued to walk out, they would reach the edge of Blackwing's nest. There were some foreign clans curled up here. Some of them were monsters that surrendered to the Black Dragon after the defeat of the Green Capital, such as the Thorn Beast. There were also some clans that were afraid of the Black Dragon's power and wanted to join him, such as the Dwarf Bear People and some scattered kobolds. Caesar maintained a low altitude and revealed his face. He slowly streaked across the sky above the territory, overlooking the entire Blackwing's nest. His low voice was like a rolling thunder. Everywhere he passed, monsters would look sideways, stop what they were doing, and then lower their heads and crawl. Caesar was quite satisfied with the current situation of Blackwing's nest. Although it was not very orderly, there was at least a certain degree of order. After all, monsters had their limitations. It was almost impossible for them to be as orderly as humans and maintain a precise social structure. Even so, Blackwing's nest was much more orderly than other non-human evil forces. Of course, this stability was only on the surface. One could imagine that once something happened to the Black Dragon Lord, or if he disappeared for too long, this place would erupt into chaos. However, at least for now, Blackwing's nest was still in a rather harmonious state. After confirming that there were no problems, the Black Dragon began to increase his speed and climb higher. Deep red flames spewed out from the gaps at the ends of his wings like a raging fire. Caesar shot up into the sky with a bang. He then adjusted his direction and found the direction of Theron Gobi and sped off. 15 minutes later, boom! He landed with a loud crash without slowing down. Using his unparalleled strength, he forcibly twisted the huge inertia and nailed himself to the ground. Rocks crumbled under the giant Black Dragon's feet, splashing everywhere. Smoke and dust rose into the air, accompanied by a powerful shockwave. As the attached Dragon Body Strengthening Potion Type 3 began to take effect, this dragon's power received new nourishment. It was accumulating power and was ready to welcome a new round of breakthrough growth. This caused the Black Dragon to start to feel sleepy and was about to enter another long slumber. Sooner or later, I'll have to connect Blackwing's nest and the Underdark, Caesar thought as he stared at the dilapidated and desolate abandoned city. The distance between the two bases was too far. It was always a problem. But this was not a small project. Although Caesar had only flown for 15 minutes, Blackwing's nest was still quite a distance away from the Underdark. He had to pass through the wilderness and the monster canyon on the way. The wilderness was easy to conquer. After Caesar's family's destruction, it had once again fallen into a state of chaos and disorder. But the monster canyon had its own master. The Flying Ape tribe had occupied that place for nearly 1,000 years, longer than the Black Dragon Nesatoria and the Green Dragon Sylvia had occupied the Green Rain Forest. They had a strong foundation, but it didn't matter. No matter how strong a tribe's foundation was, it was still a tribe after all. It couldn't compare to the wildly expanding Blackwing's nest. Moreover, Caesar had the orc's layer of relationship. Peaceful unification was also a good way. In this way, the golden name of the orcs was quite useful. When his power expanded in the future, Caesar could even slowly gather the remnants of the ancient orc empire and create a new monster empire. This vision was doable. Caesar learned from some books that the subordinates of the orcs had always been loyal and united, and they didn't have a good life. Most of them were continuously persecuted and hunted by humans and hid in various remote corners of Iradia. Under such circumstances, the possibility of the orc clans meeting and joining forces with each other was very high. It was just that he didn't know if there was anyone else who had done so before him. Caesar learned about the history of the ancient orc empire. In the distant Second Era, the various conflicts between the ancient orc empire and the empire on which the sun never sets continued to intensify, and finally a war broke out. Up until now, it was still the largest war in the history of Aledia. The flames of war had spread across the entire continent. Countless branches of the two empires had participated in the war, either actively or passively. Legends had fallen, and kings had been bathed in blood. Through the groundless history, the war between the two empires had even led to a war between the gods. The gods that the humans and the orcs believed in had fought within their respective divine kingdoms. This long war with both sides winning and losing lasted for 76 years, during which there were two huge turning points. The first was Isaac, the leader of the Broken Bones tribe. This guy carried out a crazy plan to steal the divine power of the Eye of Gawushi, and succeeded in causing the divine object to completely seal its power and no longer work. This was the starting point, which made the Orc Empire gradually fall into a disadvantageous position in the war, and there was a continuous defeat for 8 years. In the end, the Orc Emperor knew that this would lead to a slow death of the empire, so he decided to gamble with all his strength. In the super battle of more than 1 million people in the Sunset Plain, the descendants of the giants, who were the main battle tribe in the Orc Empire, changed sides for some reason. They suddenly withdrew their defense line and led the Dawn Legion to raid the main hinterland of the empire, ending the war and beating the ancient empire that could compete with the rising Sun City into the dust. The history of the Second Era of Iradia also came to an end with the destruction of the Orc Empire, and it entered the Third Era, where humans had all the right to speak. It had been more than 1600 years since then. What was puzzling was that, after the victory was established, the empire on which the sun never sets cruelly cleaned up the remnants of the Orc Empire. At the same time, they also used a sharp sword against the giants who had made great contributions. Not only did they not fulfill the oath they had promised before, but they would rather be punished by God to carry out a genocide against the giants. Moreover, their strength was even more ferocious than hunting down the remnants of the Orc Empire. So today, the giants of Iradia were almost extinct. Even the books did not have the figures of these guys. Caesar did not find any information about this race. Chapter 153. The abandoned city in the Gobi Desert was hidden in the yellow sand, like a lonely castle that no one cared about. There had been no living things here, but it did not mean that there were no dead things. After a few years, there were more skeletons in the ruins. From time to time, one could see shadows in the shadows, and some were even holding weapons. Knowing how to use weapons was a signal among the skeletons. This meant that they were of a higher level than the unintelligent skeletons. Although these guys were still incompetent in the undead sequence, they were much stronger than the ordinary skeletons. Of course, they were not the native creatures of Theron's ruins, but the spies sent by Engalmo to the surface world. They were responsible for monitoring the surroundings of the ruins and keeping the people below on guard to deal with some unexpected situations. Most of the skeletons did not know Caesar. They were not afraid of the dragon's aura, nor were they afraid of huge individuals. After sensing the roar and dust, they immediately gathered around, silently raising their swords, hammers, and axes, and rushed toward the black dragon. Unfortunately, the way these guys opened their mouths was not scary at all. Instead, it was kind of cute. Of course, this was only for Caesar. These emotionless undead that only knew how to kill, it was difficult for ordinary people to fight back. For them, it was like a horrible nightmare, and for some inexperienced adventurers, it would take a lot of time to get rid of these skeletons. The black dragon began to walk forward, either swinging them away with his tail, or grabbing them one by one with his claws and then throwing them aside. Anyway, he did not crush the skeletons directly. He did not inherit the ruthlessness of the pentashade dragons that would immediately go berserk once they were offended. For these good soldiers who did their duty all year round, the Black Dragon Lord was quite tolerant. So, under the relentless obstruction of the skeleton soldiers, Caesar steadily opened the steel gate and began to walk down. Behind the Black Dragon, the skeletons were still persevering in their pursuit. It was only when they sensed that Anglamo was waiting silently at the exit of the passage that the soldiers, who had persevered, finally stopped and ran back to the world above ground. Speaking of which, there was also a small episode. Caesar found fresh human corpses in this place through the tunnel of the magic nodes, and he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. The corpses were dressed differently. Some wore leather armor and held long swords, while others only wore ragged clothes and held short daggers. They looked like mercenaries and bandits. They probably found the closed steel door by chance and thought that there was some secret treasure hidden below. They couldn't hold back their greed and curiosity and went to explore. In the end, they were slaughtered by the high-level undead sent by the skeletal dragon. He was truly an adventurer who would take advantage of every opportunity. Welcome back, my father. In front of him was a huge skeleton that was emitting phosphorescent flames. It was about 14 to 15 meters long from head to tail, and its bones were grayish-brown. Inside its chest and ribs, there were surging blue balls of light. The phosphorescent flames outlined the transparent shape of a true dragon, just like when it still had flesh. The soul fire burning in its eye sockets was so vigorous that it overflowed from its eye sockets and floated above its head. Angolan Targaryen, the Dragon of Bones. Comprehensive Combat Ability Assessment. 290. She had completed the stage of explosive growth after birth and reached the state that a high-level undead should have. Although her ability had not been completely fixed, the following progress and growth would become quite slow. The daughter remembered the smell of her father, so no matter how Caesar's body shape changed, Angramo could immediately distinguish it. The skeletal dragon bowed and seemed to want to get closer. She tried to move forward, but in fear of the majesty of the Black Dragon Lord, she immediately gave up and stopped in place. Caesar didn't notice the emotions and small movements of the undead. This guy was paying attention to other things, and then he couldn't help but frown. He saw that behind Angolan, a large number of skeleton soldiers were entangled and fighting, and further away, there were also many undead figures that were fighting. "What's going on?" he asked. "War." The skeletal dragon turned away from the body that blocked Caesar's line of sight and came to his left. "The war with the Black Knight. Nigendro, this seemingly honest guy, actually betrayed us?" Caesar scratched his chin twice with his nails. In this case, the Black Knight might as well not stay. The humans in Iradia all said that the chaotic camp was not good. In fact, he could accept it whether it was chaotic or not, but it was not good to be capricious. "No, father." Compared to the Black Dragon Lord, Angramo's body was extremely petite. The skeletal dragon's body was 15 or 16 meters long, but the difference in physique could not be made up. Low-level undead creatures can grow in fighting and absorb nutrient. We are preparing for the future and training better and stronger skeleton warriors. Angramo explained, her voice gradually turning from calm to excited growl. "The undead army thirsts for war and is always on standby. Father, as long as you give the order, we can go to Iradia at any time and let your enemies howl in the abyss." "Is that so? Well done." Caesar was a little embarrassed and could only respond in this way. These guys were a little too overconfident. It was true that the number of undead was almost endless, but as a whole, they lacked real high-end strength. The skeletal dragon and the Black Knight had reached the peak. If this army was really placed in Iradia, it would not be enough for the countries in the north to chop them up. At the same time, without the accumulation of time, it was impossible to give birth to truly powerful and intelligent high-level undead. Perhaps Angramo was also aware of this point, but the undead's nature of hating the living could not be extinguished. They were so eager for war that even the skeletal dragon could not resist this primitive drive. At this time, if Caesar knew that the karmic dragon had published a set of sustainable development theories, he would definitely regret it. If the karmic dragon was in charge of the affairs of the Underdark, it would definitely find ways to maintain the balance between the undead and the monsters, and try its best to cultivate loyal native creatures of the Underdark that could show up in the surface world for Caesar to nourish Blackwing's nest. But if it was Angramo, the skeletal dragon would never care about the ecology of the native creatures, and there was no such idea in its mind at all. It would be good if it could follow the instructions of the Black Dragon Lord and not hurt them. It had been considering the war preparations of the undead army, and the resources of the Underdark were never tilted towards the native creatures. Of course, this was also what Caesar had expected before he left. For him, Blackwing's nest was the real core, and the Underdark was just a breeding ground for the secret undead army and a breeding ground for the logistics deployment. So, as long as Angrimo could ensure the normal operation of the wild boar tribe, there was basically no problem. So next, Caesar went to see the Pavel and ordered him to increase the power and status of the wild boar tribe leader. He asked Angrimo to assist him as much as possible and to send and suppress the skeletons for the wild boar tribe. This was because he saw that the wild boar tribe's breeding work had been done quite well recently. Could be said that it was in full swing, and it was better than the original orcs. Looking around, the huge horsegate lizards could be counted as a group. The growth cycle of the species of the Underdark was quite short. Chapter 154. Northeast of Iradia, the Elven Forest. This was a vast and boundless rainforest. Originally, there were tree shepherds and Taya elves who could control the growth of plants. Coupled with the blessing of the goddess of fertility, the growth of the plants in this area was astonishingly good, far surpassing that of the Green Capital. In the Elven Forest, almost every plant could break through the normal growth limit. Therefore, in this place, one could see jungle-like shrubs, wild growth, and a broad-leaved forest that was dozens of meters tall. Vines that were thicker than pythons were entwined in the forest, and there were even dandelion seeds that were 30 centimeters in size, as well as fluffy leaves the size of a roof. This place was like a fairy tale world, a paradise for herbivores. Of course, it was also Luna's home. The little girl sat on the edge of a branch at the top of a giant tree, swinging her legs as she looked towards the west at the spreading forest in the distance. The sky was clear and peaceful as the sun shone through the layers of broad-leaved forest, sprinkling fine colors. The flourishing snapdragons were bright red like fire, and the sunflowers were as brilliant as gold. Some of the trees were as large as a wall, covered with drought golden lotuses that carefully peeked around. This scene was too beautiful to take in, but she had already seen it for 25 days and was gradually getting tired of it. Just like most neutral intelligent species children, when Luna returned home, she immediately felt the incomparable warmth of her family. Her parents asked her about her well-being and cared for her. They were practically everywhere, asking her to tell them what she had seen and heard during her travels. But as time passed, this warmth gradually faded, and she became accustomed to it. Her days became dull and uneventful. Oh, phew! Luna tore the petal that was the same size as her into strips and threw it down. She lowered her head and watched the petals dance in the air. Then, she also jumped down and floated along with the little white flower. When she reached the middle of the giant tree, Luna's figure twisted and with a whoosh, she entered the secret tree hole of the fairy race, Tyarope's family. She told her parents about her plans to leave again. "My child." Her father, Tyarope, after listening and thinking, said with a serious and loving tone, "Your suggestion really makes me feel pain. Child, do you know? You've only been home for less than 25 days, and now you're planning to leave us again." With that, Tyarope silently pursed her thin lips. Even though she was a male forest spirit, she still looked very handsome and feminine. No matter what, she couldn't assume a dignified posture. However, in the eyes of Luna, who had always been well-behaved, her father's words were hard to disobey. She could only turn her gaze to her mother for help, only to find that her mother, who had always doted on her, also had a troubled and unwilling expression on her face. This was very normal. According to the forest fairy's concept of time, 25 days was the same as how humans viewed 2.5 days. "Father." Luna bit her lip and said weakly, "I'm not going very far this time. I'm just outside the elven forest. I can return home at any time. Even in the periphery, it's still quite dangerous. Countless evil forces are spying on this place. Her mother, Balanwai, said with lingering fear, "Child, you don't know, but just a few days after you returned, there were actually bad seeds that snuck into the elven forest. Moreover, they were wandering around the area where the fairies lived. This gave me and your father a fright. At the time, we didn't dare to tell you, afraid that something would happen to you. I'm not that cowardly." Luna's small eyebrows scrunched together. Fortunately, the Lord Protector arrived in time and prevented these bad seeds from doing anything evil. Luna's mother patted her chest as if she had been frightened. This was an action that mother and daughter had inherited from the same lineage. "I'll be very careful," Luna said, and then showed the small necklace around her neck to her parents. "Look, I also obtained a magical item during my travels. It can protect me." Magical item. Her parents, however, did not react. Looking at the necklace, Tierope only shook his head. "Child, you have to know that we don't need you to have any magical items, nor do we want you to travel the outside world and grow into a knowledgeable person. The forest fairies don't need these things. We only want you to be safe and happy and not be hurt." Her mother reached out a slender and delicate hand to hold her daughter's, using her warm and delicate palm to rub Luna's fingertips, just like when she was young. Fairies are the most inconspicuous race in Iradia. Our abilities are limited. Things like traveling and punishing evil are things that only elven rangers, chimeras, and giant eagles would consider. Did something happen? At this time, her father, Tierope, suddenly asked. Noticing the hesitant and troubled expression on his daughter's face, he said gently, "Child, don't be afraid. Tell us if there's anything, and we'll think of a way for you." No. Luna's fingers subconsciously shrank in her mother's hand, and she quickly shook her head. "How could anything happen to me?" Her parents were the most ordinary of forest fairies. They were diligent and simple, and had never left the elven forest in their lives, nor had they encountered any dangers. Luna didn't want to lie to them, but if she told her parents that she had raised a big evil dragon outside, she really didn't know what would happen next. "All right, if you insist." His father sighed and said, "Give me and your mother some time to discuss." In the small room in the tree hole, Luna's mother looked at Tierope with a heavy expression. "There's a problem. If it was said that no one knew a son better than a mother, then no one knew a daughter better than a mother." In Caesar's words, Luna's silly and sweet personality could not hide from her parents at all. She was seen through at a glance. "What do you think we should do?" Luna's mother asked, and then tears began to fall. My poor child, she must have met some bad people and been forced by some hateful evil species. She even began to imagine some scenes of her daughter being enslaved. No, if it's really as you say, those evil fellows wouldn't have let her go home at all. Tierope shook her head, denying her mother's wild thoughts. According to the genealogy records, there are very few fairies in history who can escape from the hands of the evil races. If our child really did escape, would she dare to leave the elven forest again? That was reasonable. Luna's mother couldn't help but think about it and nodded. That seems to be the case. Tierope took out a small cup from the treehouse, and then poured 2 drops of flower dew into it. She drank a mouthful and left 2 drops, so I guess this silly child probably made some friends outside. These young adventurers like to promise each other when they're parting, and agree to go on an adventure together next time. Our child doesn't know how to refuse, so she agreed to it. It's not good for her to regret it afterwards, but now that the time is up, she can only fulfill the promise. That should be the case. This silly child. Luna's mother also nagged, and then asked, "Then what do we do now? What else can we do? You don't want our child to break her promise, right? I'll go visit the guardians later, and see if any of them are willing to go on an adventure in the near future." Tierope said helplessly, "Let her become the servant of the elven ranger, the chimera, and the giant eagle. The journey will be safer if they go on a trip together. Also, take a look at her friends and help us check on them. Luna's mother thought about it and felt that it was reasonable. Yes, it's really hard for you to go so far. As she said that, she became angry. After this, we can't let this child be willful until she becomes an adult and becomes a partner. Chapter 155. Nero and his kin had already returned, but their numbers were much smaller. It was said that they were being hunted down by the native creatures of the elven forest, and had no choice but to return early. After this report was confirmed by the demon hound leader, Caesar recorded the information they had gathered, and then put it aside without any follow-up. After all, in the Black Dragon Lord's plan, the order of operations against the elven forest was behind the northern kingdoms, so Caesar did not care too much about the elven forest for now. The reason why he had ordered his kin to infiltrate was mainly to protect Luna, and at the same time, to do some simple intelligence gathering. They had returned, but the one Caesar was really waiting for, Hogg, who was in charge of capturing the goblins, and Gaul, who was in charge of searching for the Taurens, had not returned yet. Of course, Luna had not returned either. Humph! The black dragon snorted, lying in a pile of gold nests in the treasury, turned over and stuck out his tongue, sucking all the gold coins in front of him into his mouth. After that, this fellow narrowed his eyes and took a few bites, and he swallowed all these shiny and good things. He enjoyed his life of sitting idly and eating, and he was satisfied to the point the scales on his entire body started to curl up and open up. No wonder these dragons liked to collect treasures. It was so delicious. Caesar thought with a huff. As time passed, he gradually got used to eating metals, and now he was eating these treasures as snacks, or even staple food. Furthermore, this damned black dragon had even figured out how to match the ingredient. For example, if gold and iron were eaten together, there would be a bitter taste. If mithril was mixed with a certain amount of copper, it would taste like chewing on a spicy strip. If gold and silver were eaten directly, it would taste like eating white chocolate. Anyway, it was delicious. Enough. I can't indulge in the days of eating treasures anymore. I have to use them to exchange for greater wealth. The black dragon shook his head in annoyance, made up his mind, and began to walk out. In the end, he grabbed a handful of gold and stuffed it into his mouth, and then firmly closed the door of the treasury. Recently, he had been working on changing the ecology of Blackwing's nest. Originally, the Black Dragon Lord's subordinates mostly relied on hunting and the supply of the Underdark for food, but this could not go on. He had been thinking about this hidden danger for a long time. After thinking for a while, Caesar decided to find another way out before the Taurens who had the talent for planting arrived. He lured a batch of high-quality newborn steel bulls and horned sheep from the wild boar people to use as seeds. He had his subordinates change from hunting to herding. The intelligent Shadow Manticore was in charge of this matter. The vast wilderness outside the green capital was the best prototype for a pasture. Of course, grazing in the wilderness was still in the experimental stage. It was just an experiment. Most of the resources were still in the Underdark. Because of the hot climate and the lack of water, every time the dry season came, there would be a severe drought in this place. It was difficult to provide high-quality and stable grassland. However, Caesar had a solution. Speaking of which, this was a suggestion that came out of the blue. Because it was a guard, the Dragonkin leader had the opportunity to hear the Black Dragon Lord's orders to the Manticore. After that, it carefully reminded its master that the Ankhegs were now under His Majesty's protection and were not afraid of their natural enemies. They could fully utilize their racial specialty, digging underground lakes in the distance between Blackwing's nest and the wilderness. When the time came, they could connect to the Green River for irrigation and store water during the rainy season, completely transforming the environment of the wilderness. This idea came from the battle lizardmen. The Dragonkin leader saw them diligently digging a channel from the Green River to the treetop fortress, creating a pool of water for them to breed and live in. For this reason, the Black Dragon Lord summoned the Ankheg tribe to ask about the possibility. After hearing the order, the Ankheg leader did not dare to lie and told the Black Dragon that this plan was feasible. However, it could be seen that the Ankheg leader was extremely reluctant. Even for the Ankhegs, whose racial talent was to create underground caves, the scale of such a project was huge. From the beginning of the project to the end, countless of their species would die in the deep underground, turning into bones that no one cared about. Unlike the gnolls, the Ankhegs were not evil creatures. Although they were also considered evil creatures, their abilities required them to work together, so they were quite close to each other. As the leader, of course, they did not want to see their people die in large numbers. It was only when the Black Dragon Lord nodded and promised that once the Ankhegs completed this project, they would be promoted to the ranks of the privileged clans. Only then did the Ankhegs become motivated, nodding and accepting the order and immediately starting to prepare. The reason why the Ankhegs were willing to sacrifice their lives for this promise was mainly because in Blackwing's nest, the privileges of the privileged clans were becoming clearer and clearer, and the difference between them and the ordinary clans was becoming more and more obvious. The Ankhegs could truly feel the difference in social class. For example, because most of the meat now came from the Underdark and was distributed by the Gnoll clans, there would be differences between the clans. Food for the privileged clans would definitely be guaranteed, but for the ordinary clans, apart from the Demonkin who were about to be promoted to the privileged clans, the other clans would be allocated relatively little food. They could only work harder to go out and hunt to replenish their food need. In the Green Capital, which had been completely reformed, this was actually quite difficult. This was because the other clans absolutely could not touch Blackwing's nest. This was a red line, and if they stepped on it, they would be subjected to a torturous massacre. Most of the other beasts had been hunted to extinction when Blackwing's nest was first built. In addition, the new foreign clans like the Thorn Beasts and Kobolds belonged to the true bottom rung. They were not allocated any resources in Blackwing's nest, and were even exploited. The Grey Centaur clan had contributed greatly in the Battle of the Green Capital and had been promoted to the same status as the ordinary clans. This was a situation that the Black Dragon Lord had intentionally facilitated. To be honest, this kind of favoritism towards one clan and discriminating against the other had caused serious dissatisfaction among the ordinary clans in the beginning. Because of this, the hearts of the people in Blackwing's nest had wavered, and violent bloody conflicts had even erupted. However, in the end, all of this was brutally suppressed by Hogg, who wielded the legendary weapon Bloodthirst, and used blood as a warning. This was the monster clans. Before they were completely domesticated, they could not abide by the rules of humans and would erupt into chaos at the slightest provocation. Not only now, but even in the days to come when Blackwing's nest was steadily expanding, there would be no lack of internal conflicts of all sizes. Caesar had long since gotten used to it. On the external side, the benefits of the Black Dragon Lord's behind-the-scenes control of the northern countries, Khaki Hill, were gradually beginning to show. One must know that in the human world, 99% of the problems could be solved with money. If it could not be solved, first consider whether there was not enough money, and then consider other problems. It just so happened that Caesar was now rich, and he was willing to spend it. Therefore, Blackwing's nest was in charge of providing the money, and Khaki Hill was in charge of recruiting craftsmen, and the entire business was proceeding smoothly. Now, in the hinterland of Khaki Hill, there were already more than hundreds of armorsmiths gathered together, and they began to forge weapons and armor specially made for the orcs and grey centaurs. The first batch of goods was expected to be delivered in a month's time. As for the design of the canine demon clan's weapons and equipment, the Black Dragon Lord borrowed money from Brendel's family to contact the reclusive Black Castle dwarves, and the dwarven masters were responsible for the design and customization. Although Caesar's unusual methods of doing things were somewhat concealed, it still attracted the attention of some people. Of course, this was also related to the fact that Caesar did not have strict requirements in this regard, because he knew that it was only a matter of time before the shapeshifters were exposed. With the death of all the members of the real Brendel family, their loyal subordinates would sooner or later discover that the restrictions on them had disappeared. This was something that could not be hidden. Of course, those soldiers would not publicize anything. The real impact was that once the shapeshifters were injured and killed, their innate abilities would be ineffective, and they would inevitably be exposed. And now, the situation in the northern countries was turbulent. Based on the current situation, Grand Duke Lionheart was gritting his teeth and preparing for a second Rhine civil war at any time. As the Lord of Khaki, if Brendel did not want to surrender his territory, he would have to go to the battlefield. And if he went to the battlefield, he could die, and if he died, he would be exposed. Therefore, time was still quite tight. Caesar felt that instead of spending time and effort to keep it a secret, it was better to let the shapeshifters have a certain amount of cover to increase their efficiency as much as possible, and use all the available resources in the shortest time possible to pour into Blackwing's nest. When the time came for a real war, the Black Dragon Lord, who had already tasted the benefits of controlling the human race, would not easily give up this colony, and would definitely participate in the war. And once he joined the war, this war would change. It would no longer be a civil war in Rhine, but a war between Blackwing's nest and the northern countries. So during this period, Caesar, the Black Dragon Lord, could eat, drink, and slack off, but as his kin, he could not stop for a moment. Chapter 156. Luna shuttled through the forest with a smile on her face as she bypassed the entwined hedges and passed through the pink and white flowers peeking out of the hedges. She was in a very good mood. Earlier in the morning, her father finally relented and agreed to let Luna go out again. With her parents' agreement, the little one finally heaved a sigh of relief. After that, Luna spent some time walking around the Fae's residence, saying goodbye to her new friends, flowers, vines, and trees one by one. After that, she returned to the starting point, intending to stay with her parents for one last time before leaving the elven forest. Luna found the ancient tree where her family lived and flew up. Soon, she reached the middle section and arrived at the door. The entrance to the Fae's residence was a small wooden gate. The hinges were made of twigs and branches, and the gate was made of vines and sharpened wood. Of course, such a small gate did not have the ability to resist external forces. However, in the elven forest, this small wooden gate had a special meaning. It meant that the forest fae lived inside, and not animals like squirrels and tree owls. The little one stretched out her hand and pushed gently, and the gate opened. The layout of Tyelope's house was divided into 3 levels. The lowest level was the storeroom, where various old things that her parents did not want to throw away were piled up. The level at the entrance was used as the living room to entertain friends. Further up, there were some small rooms that were separated. Those were Luna and her parents' bedrooms. When the Fae built the house, in order not to damage the life of the tree, they would generally not hollow out the inside. They would only find a suitable place and dig out some of the tree material from the edge. Because the elven forest's vegetation grew at an extremely large scale, such a space was enough for the Fae. As long as they maintained a stabilizing spell, the house would not be swallowed up by the tree's recovery. Luna saw her parents sitting on small chairs as soon as she entered the house. "You're back." Her father turned his gaze and said something of a greeting. The little one nodded and did not say anything. In the elven forest, it was rare for a Fae to be allowed to travel before reaching adulthood. Compared to the other Fae's family, her parents were quite tolerant. Looking at her silent daughter, Luna's mother held back for a while. She could not help but ask her directly, "Silly child, when are you coming back this time?" "Very soon," Luna said timidly, The place I'm going to is not far from the elven forest. I should be able to come back every 2 or 3 months. If possible, it might be even longer. Remember to be careful. Luna's mother said, you have to be careful when you're outside. I heard that there are no forest fairies outside of the elven forest. It's too dangerous. I will, Luna whispered. His father, Tielope, had been silent all this time. He pursed his lips and finally opened his mouth. Your mother prepared some food for you and some small coins in the bag you brought back. I don't know if we can use it outside. Take it with you. Okay. Also, we've found a companion for you. Lord Maxier has agreed to take care of you and bring you along. Yes. The little guy continued to nod and only reacted after 2 seconds. She was originally quite touched, but now she was stunned and said in shock, Lord Max Hill? Yes. Luna's mother nodded. You really don't know how to behave. Your father specially went to the Guardian's residence to ask about your matter. Finally, Lord Maxier said that he plans to go out for a walk. After knowing about our situation, he didn't mind the trouble and is willing to take you along. Wait. Luna hurriedly waved her hand. She thought for a while and asked carefully, What is Maxier? You child, you can't be so rude outside. The Guardians protect the elven forest and bleed for our safety. Can't you call them Lord? Her father first sternly reprimanded her, then his tone softened. Lord Maxier is a chimera. At this time, Tielope looked at the sky through the wall window. It's about time. That lord shouldn't be late. I'll go out and take a look. As he spoke, he flapped his transparent wings that were wider than the female fairies and prepared to go out. I'll go with you. Luna hurriedly stood up. The place she wanted to return to was Blackwing's nest, the territory of a big evil dragon. How could she bring a kind race there? She was thinking about how to refuse, but when she opened the door of the tree hole, she saw a huge monster that occupied her entire field of vision. Chimera. If this name was translated in modern terms, it should be chimera. They were not native to Iradia, but monsters completely created by the gods. It was worth mentioning that other intelligent races had some misunderstandings about chimeras. The humans in Iradia had seen too many chimeras and subconsciously thought that all chimeras were an evil tribe. To the creatures in the elven forest, they subconsciously thought that chimeras were all kind creatures. This was actually a wrong and one-sided view. Just like how there were good Taya elves and evil night elves among the elves, there were also differences between chimeras. These chimeras were actually created by the 2 goddesses, Serene and Shar, and had a strong alignment. The chimeras created by Shar belonged to the evil alignment. They were all 2-headed monsters with a lion's head, a goat's body, and a snake's tail. They had sharp claws and purple scales, and they also had a pair of dragon-like wings. Like real dragons, they relied on levitation to fly and used their wings to adjust their direction. The chimeras created by Serene, the moon goddess, were actually kind creatures. Because of the later generations, the moon goddess simply used the evil chimeras as a template. They were 2-headed monsters with a goat's body and a snake's tail. They had claws and wings, but their heads were more like real dragons. They had no scales, only rough and wrinkled skin. In the elven forest, there were a large number of chimeras of the good alignment created by the moon goddess. However, no matter which faction the chimeras belonged to, they were all extremely ugly. It was likely that when creating these chimeras, the 2 goddesses had only considered their combat capabilities, and had never thought of giving these chimeras a certain degree of beauty. Although they were also archenemies, when it came to the design concept of creating the lower class, they were completely inferior to the Platinum Dragon God and the Evil Dragon Mother. It should be noted that the majestic Gold Dragon and the ferocious Red Dragon were both popular. Because of their valiant strength and eye-catching appearance, they were respectively the representatives and leaders of their respective camps. Chapter 157. Why aren't they back yet? The black dragon stood up on his hind legs and looked into the distance. He bared his teeth and thought angrily. From his nose, 2 long and thick streams of white smoke were exhaled. His body was like a burning furnace. Speaking of which, this guy had become more and more tired and irritable in the past few days. This was because the genetic enhancement drug type 3, attached to the crimson gold reward, had provided Caesar with enough nourishment. The black dragon's body had been nourished, and it couldn't wait to enter a new round of hibernation. However, Caesar's willpower was in conflict with his body's reaction, so he was becoming more and more irritable. Ever since the transformation of his body in the Underdark, the black dragon hadn't fallen into a long hibernation period. It had been a full 7 years since then. In Iradia, there were no true dragons that were as active as he was during his teenage years. Even the most powerful red dragon, Kuan-gu-dios, spent most of his teenage years in hibernation. There were very few records of the red dragon going out during his teenage years. However, to say that Caesar was one of a kind wasn't the case. In the millions of years of history of the dragon species, there was no lack of freak. In the outer world far away from Eladia, there was a white dragon known as Frostwing, mad clamor that was famous for its magical fetishes and strange evilness. It was also very active in its youth. However, the white dragon's whereabouts were uncertain recently, and it rarely sent any news to the outside world. Of course, because the black dragon wasn't powerful enough at the moment, Caesar didn't know about the existence of those abnormal dragon bodies. Besides, even if he did know, he wouldn't be able to come into contact with them. The reason he was so angry at this moment was that he was extremely sleepy, but he had to force himself to stay awake and wait patiently for his family to return. After all, only when Hogg, Gaul, and Luna returned and settled the work of the goblins and minotaurs, as well as when Hogg took over the management of the goblins and minotaurs, only then could Caesar enter a long hibernation with peace of mind. However, until now Hogg, Gaul, and Luna still hadn't returned to Blackwing's nest. Not even their shadows could be seen. Let these guys be captured by the demons. That way, I won't have to worry about them. Caesar cursed angrily. He lowered his body and walked forward. Of course. Mr. Tyelope. Seeing the fairy come out of the small treehouse, the two-headed chimera revealed a smile. Although its body was that of a monster and its appearance was extremely ugly, its eyes and tone were very gentle. Greetings, Lord Magus Hill. It was obvious that the chimera had been waiting here. Luna's father bowed slightly, thanking the chimera for its patience and kindness. But it's so ugly. Luna raised her head and looked at the chimera that was over 10 meters long. Although she was also a member of the Elven Forest, she had seen chimeras before and didn't think much of them. But this time, she didn't know why, but when she saw the chimera, Luna felt that they were ugly to the point of being deformed. She felt that it was a far cry from the big black dragon. The chimera looked at her curiously and carefully, then turned its head and said to Luna's father, "This is your child? It's hard to imagine that a child of the forest would have such a strong interest in traveling. I've made a fool of myself in front of you." Tyelope smiled awkwardly, then pulled Luna forward and introduced her. "This is my daughter, Luna Branwell Tyelope Ovkaniston Lavender Clepithia Stinio." Tyelope spoke smoothly, and the chimera didn't interrupt him. It patiently waited for him to finish reading her name, then nodded to the fairy girl. "Greetings, Miss Luna. Lord Magus Hill. Greetings." Thinking of her father's warning, Luna couldn't help but address him as such. She then hurriedly said, "Actually, there's no need to trouble you. The place I'm going to is very close. It's less than a day's journey from the Elven Forest." This explanation was actually a veiled refusal. Luna really didn't want to go with this chimera. If she really let it go to Blackwing's nest with her, it would probably die. It would really die. Luna knew what kind of character her big black dragon had. Unfortunately, The chimera didn't understand the meaning of the fairy's words at all. Thought that she was being sensitive and shy. It heard that the forest fairies were as curious and timid as cats when they were young, so Magus Hill smiled warmly and said, "It's all right. Since it's only a day's journey, it won't be a problem. All the more reason I should send you along. Protecting the weak is the duty of all guardians." But it's still so ugly, seeing it speak with such confidence. Luna's mind once again had this thought. Besides, I'm also going to the outside world to investigate. I heard from my fellow guardians that something big happened in the western forest adjacent to us. A powerful black dragon has either imprisoned or killed an old green dragon, and it's quite famous. I heard that the humans in the northern kingdoms call it the Dragon King. I'm very interested in that place and want to take a look. Then you have to be careful. Luna's father had a worried expression after hearing this. Almost no fairies had ever seen a real evil dragon, but just this name alone was no less than a natural disaster to them. I will. Magus Hill replied and changed the topic to the fairy girl. Miss Luna, I don't know which direction you're heading in. I think I should send you safely there before heading to that forest. That's the western forest. Luna felt a little awkward. What a wonderful coincidence. Magus Hill smiled. We're heading in the same direction. Yes, that's indeed the case. Mr. Tierrope interrupted. This father was in a good mood. It seemed that his daughter's contact with the guardians was going smoothly. But it wasn't surprising. The creatures of the elven forest would definitely have a good impression of the powerful and gentle chimera. At the same time, Lord Magus Hill was still young, so his daughter should be able to chat with it on the way. So Tierrope went with the flow and said, "My lord, we've already packed the child's luggage. You can leave at any time. What do you think, Miss Luna?" Although its appearance was deformed, the chimera was still graceful and courteous. It first asked the fairy girl. All right. Luna's little face scrunched up. She hesitated and agreed. She wasn't good at rejecting others. Moreover, this chimera's goal was Blackwing's nest. She couldn't be considered tricking it, right? Chapter 158. Miss Luna, are you sure you want to come to? This is the place? The chimera, Magusher, remained vigilant, carefully crossing the gully under its feet. It did not dare to fly and tried to make as little noise as possible while asking the fairy girl in front of it. Yes, my lord. Luna turned her head to answer it. Her voice was calm and her expression was tranquil. But it's dangerous here. As a chimera created by the moon god Serene, although Magusher was not as powerful as the ancestral chimera, its abilities were not bad. It was more balanced in all aspects and had a certain level of perception. In the short 20 minutes since stepping into the green field, it had sensed at least 4 pairs of eyes that were filled with malice. Magusher was sure that those were the eyes of evil creatures. But for some reason, those eyes disappeared in the end. Nothing jumped out to make waves, allowing it and the little fairy to enter the green field smoothly. Of course, as a member of the Guardians of the Elven Forest, Magus Hill had the ability to rush out and ferret out those guys who were spying on them in the dark to see what they were. But the chimera did not do that. One had to know that it was best not to act rashly in a completely unfamiliar environment before having enough confidence. This sentence came from the mouth of a human adventurer, but it was equally applicable to all creatures. In response to the chimera's reminder, Luna could only remain silent. She did not know how to tell Magusher that this was the Blackwing's nest that it had originally planned to secretly visit. If it was lucky, it might be able to directly meet the Dragon King, the Black Dragon Lord, Caesar Tangerine. Lord Magusher, I'm sorry to trouble you to send me here. I think that I have arrived at my destination, so I won't take up any more of your time. On behalf of the fairy race, I would like to express my gratitude to you. Thank you. Luna made a final effort to persuade the chimera to leave. In fact, since entering the green field, and reaching the periphery of the Blackwing's nest, she had already begun to say this. Now, she had repeated this no less than 3 times. "Please don't say that, Miss Luna. I promised your father that I would bring you to your friend. As the guardians of the elven forest, we will never break our promises." Magus Hill shook his head and gently refused. He then said, "Actually, I'm very interested in your friend. I want to see if there are any kind creatures outside of the elven forest who can become friends with the forest fairies. Moreover, this place is not safe. Even I have to be extremely careful and cautious. If you don't have any protection, it's very easy for you to be in danger." There was no other way. Luna sighed in her heart. Actually, from the Chimera's point of view, everything Magusher did was reasonable and in line with the model of the good faction. He was enthusiastic, abiding by his promises, and patient. There was no fault to be found. Unless he told the dragon that his destination was Blackwing's nest and that he was prepared to meet a great evil dragon, only then would the dragon change its mind. But could he say it? Once the Chimera found out, it would definitely return immediately and inform the other guardians of the elven forest. It would also send a message to its parents. Even with Luna's small brain, she could imagine how things would develop. If this continued, things would become extremely bad. So, the little fellow was very depressed now. She really could not think of a way to get rid of the Chimera. In the end, she decided not to think about this problem anymore. She brought Magusher along and entered the interior of Blackwing's nest. The little fellow was very familiar with this place. When the Black Dragon Lord was not accompanying her, Luna would call the husky over and let the leader of the dragon descendants bring her around. With a curious gaze, she would look at the interesting living conditions of the various clans. So, the little fellow had a basic understanding of the locations of the various clans in Blackwing's nest. She was even more familiar with it than Caesar. She brought the Chimera through the forest. In order to avoid conflict, she deliberately avoided the clan's residences and slowly approached the treetop fortress. Of course, the forces under the Black Dragon Lord were tangled and intertwined. Blackwing's nest had also been renovated by Caesar some time ago, and many places had changed. So, it was inevitable that they would be discovered. However, Miss Luna's position in Blackwing's nest was even higher than that of the Black Dragon Lord's daughter, Angrimo. Moreover, the little fairy would run around when she had nothing better to do. So, all the clans in Blackwing's nest knew this young miss, and no one dared to jump out and obstruct her. In this way, the Chimera was able to smoothly pass through most of Blackwing's nest, avoiding the various clans' residences and entering the true core. After a long time, Magusher followed behind little Luna and emerged from the dense thorny bushes. Before it could even look around, it heard an ear-piercing cry. That sound was very unpleasant, hoarse and sharp, as if it wanted to pierce its eardrums. This was the core area of Blackwing's nest, close to the treetop fortress where the Black Dragon Lord resided. It was an isolation zone that was closely monitored by the descendants of the dragons. Magusher was immediately discovered the moment it showed its head. The wyverns cried out and quickly gathered together. They began to dive downwards, preparing to attack. Although it was nervous, the Chimera still steadied itself. After sensing danger, it stood still and looked up at the wyverns that were gathering together. Relying on a levitation spell, it left the ground. Its 2 dragon-like heads let out deep breaths, each swallowing acid and lightning as it prepared for battle. However, something unexpected happened. The wyvern's dive was only halfway through when they immediately stopped in midair. Then, they let out 2 unclear whimpers and flapped their wings, flying away as if nothing had happened. "What's going on?" Magoo Hill was puzzled. It had been prepared to engage in a bloody battle, but the wyverns had actually fled with a whimper. How could these evil descendants be so cowardly? Not a single one of them could fight? Of course, the Chimera did not chase after them. It suppressed its nature of punishing evil. It was not wise to start a battle with the large number of enemies. Moreover, it had a companion by its side that needed its protection. Of course, the Chimera still had a large degree of doubt about the Wyvern's retreating without a fight. However, when it raised its head and looked around, the doubt that had just risen was immediately replaced by a huge shock. What entered its eyes was a fortress made of 4 or 5 giant ancient trees intertwined together. The walls were covered with sharp thorns, and above the center of it stood a majestic palace. It was built with a material that resembled glass and crystal. The entire structure shone brightly, as if it was a shining gem. The Chimera was not a fool. On the contrary, as a chimera created by the sister goddess, its intelligence might be higher than the native species like Iradia. Therefore, with just a glance, Magusher immediately realized that something was wrong. Although it had never been to Blackwing's nest and did not know where the so-called Dragon King lived, the hideous castle and emerald palace in front of it was definitely not a place that ordinary people could live in. Thinking of the dragon descendant that it had caught a glimpse of, Magusher immediately deduced that this was very likely the nest of an evil dragon, and it was located in the west. This was very likely the nest of the famous black dragon from a few days ago. Oh no! After coming to this conclusion, Magusher's heart throbbed violently. It made a prompt decision and immediately stretched out its claws, wanting to pull the fairy away. At the same time, it said in a low voice, "Miss Luna, this place is very dangerous. We can't stay here any longer. We have to leave immediately." At this moment, Caesar had just climbed out of the Emerald Palace. Chapter 159. The Chimera extended its claws forward. It had judged that this place was extremely dangerous and wanted to flee with the forest sprite. However, from the perspective of Caesar, who had just crawled out of the Emerald Palace, the Chimera's actions were as if it was trying to grab little Luna. This fellow was instantly enraged. A storm surged, and the draconic aura surged forth like a raging wave. The Chimera's heart skipped a beat, and it instinctively looked up. The scene before it was as if it was standing at the mouth of a volcano, witnessing an eruption. It did not even have the time to identify what it was before it was right in front of it. The Chimera wanted to retreat, but it was already too late. The furious Caesar, under the dual effects of the Crimson Heart and active hormones, had already surpassed its original limits. It could be said that he arrived in the blink of an eye, and could rely on his powerful strength to suppress the inertia and twist his body. In the next second, the Chimera's right forelimb that it had extended in an attempt to flee with the forest sprite was completely torn off. Green blood immediately splattered everywhere. However, the Chimera only had time to let out a short howl of pain before it was immediately forced back into its stomach. This was because a huge claw had grabbed its throat. Next, an unprecedented force dragged it into the air. Boom. An irresistible force wrapped around the Chimera, forcefully crashing into the thick trunk of a large tree nearby. Accompanied by the wails of blood and bones, the entire tree exploded with a loud bang. Wood shavings and broken branches swirled in the air, and the upper layer of the tree toppled down with a muffled sound. Immediately after, the Chimera was forcefully dragged along by the violent black dragon. As the world spun around it, it was ruthlessly slammed into the ground, kicking up a large cloud of dust before the tree toppled over. It was only then that the Chimera finally had the chance to let out an uncontrollable cry of pain. It felt as if all the bones in its body were about to shatter. Roar. It was only at this moment that the culprit that had attacked the Chimera let out a terrifying roar. The sound was deafening, reverberating in the green wilderness. It made the entire Blackwing's nest uneasy and restless. Shaken by the roar that could pierce metal and shatter stone, the Chimera finally recovered from its daze. To be honest, it had been beaten into a daze by the storm of attacks. Its mind was completely blank, and even its tragic howls and painful struggles were an instinctive reaction to the intense pain in its body. It was only now that its mind gradually regained clarity. The pitiful chimera arched its back, trying its best to raise its head and widen its eyes. It wanted to see clearly what the fellow who had beaten it to the point of being unable to retaliate was. This flourishing age was just as it wished. What came into view was a terrifyingly strong black dragon. That fellow's body was not long, only 16 meters, which was equivalent to the standard of a black dragon in its prime. However, that fellow looked even more ferocious than the head of the 5-colored dragons, the red dragon. Its physique was thicker and stronger than any other true dragon it had ever seen. Its muscles were knotted together, making it stand out from the masses. Its thick and short neck gave it a ferocious aura. Magus Hill couldn't help but wonder if this creature had undergone a massive growth process like the plants in the elven forest. What was even more ridiculous was that the other party was wearing something that looked like armor. However, Magus Hill had never seen armor like that before. It seemed to grow from the body from the inside out. The black dragon's eyes were deep red. He glared at it, violent flames surging in his pupils, and then he bared his fangs. Wait a minute. At this moment, Luna finally reacted. Before the Black Dragon Lord could crush the chimera's head, she quickly stopped him. No! As she spoke, she hurriedly ran over and hugged Caesar's tail with all her might. To Magus Hill's surprise, the ferocious black dragon actually stopped. It seemed to have heard the fairy girl's scolding. In its opinion, it was a scolding, and its expression changed. Following that, the evil dragon released the front claws of the injured chimera and stood up on its hind legs. First, it stepped on Magus Hill's body with one of its hind legs. At the same time, it slowly turned its head to look at the forest fairy that was holding onto its tail. Oh no! Miss Luna had attracted its attention. This evil dragon was going to attack the kind and weak forest fairy. Magus Hill subconsciously thought that he had promised Mr. Tierrope to protect his daughter. The current situation was not something he could accept. Thus, the chimera began to struggle with all its strength. However, the other party's strength was like an insurmountable mountain, firmly stomping it into the dust and unable to move at all. Damn it! I'm sorry, Mr. Tierrope. I may not be able to fulfill my promise. The guardian Magus Hill was unable to protect Miss Luna. As the price, let me also. Magus Hill was concentrating on his last words. However, he saw that the black dragon did not slap Miss Luna into meat paste as he had imagined. Instead, it skillfully extended its claws with its palms facing upwards and waited quietly. In the next second, the forest fairy sat on it very naturally. Did you miss me? It heard the fairy girl's affectionate voice ask. Magus Hill instantly fell into a state of confusion. Even his broken limb did not hurt as much. What did Miss Luna say? He could not help but wonder if he was in a trance due to his heavy injuries and had begun to hallucinate. What was even more ridiculous was that the ugly and ferocious black dragon actually responded to her. Not at all. After seeing that the little fellow was unharmed, the Black Dragon Lord pursed his lips and replied. At the same time, the violent flames in his eyes gradually extinguished. After that, Caesar looked at Magus Hill, who was under his feet. He kicked him twice before asking, "What kind of monster is this? It seemed like it wanted to catch you just now?" No. It's not like that. Although it looked ugly, Luna felt that Magus Hill was quite kind. Thus, she explained, Lord Magus Hill is a chimera descendant, a member of the guardian army of the Elven Forest. My parents were worried that I would meet with danger outside. Luna told Caesar the whole story of the matter from beginning to end. Iradia's chimera is even uglier than I thought. Caesar scratched his chin and kicked the silent Magus Hill. So, this monster is actually a fellow of the good camp. The creatures of the Elven Forest are all kind, okay? The little fellow nodded and muttered. At the same time, she noticed the Chimera's situation and said, "Also, Caesar, can you let it go first?" Due to the pain and blood loss, Magus Hill had lost a lot of strength and was about to faint. "But I can." The black dragon moved his foot away. "But this fellow can't be let go. According to what you said, it's a member of the guardian army of the Elven Forest. It also discovered our relationship. If I let it go, it will cause trouble for me." "What relationship?" Luna's focus was a little strange. "Enslavement. You have signed a contract. Unless I agree, you can't leave before I have the ability to sense things." "Oh, damn it." Chapter 160. If that's the case, cough cough. Mr. Magusher, I'm sorry. Caesar let go of the chimera beneath his feet. Its severed limb was slowly stopping bleeding. To a chimera, such an injury was serious, but it was not unbearable. After all, they were created as weapons of war. When the twin sisters created them, they gave the chimera a self-healing ability that was far superior to that of Iradia's native species. In other words, as long as the chimera did not receive any additional damage, it would have a high chance of regrowing its severed limb as long as it maintained a constant supply of nutrients and energy and rested well. Caesar did not intend to kill Magusher directly. Although the Pentashade dragons were all vicious and cruel, this fellow's way of doing things was different. Towards intelligent life forms that did not have any conflicts of interest or emotional entanglements, Caesar could maintain a certain degree of calmness. Although this fellow had been very irritable and had a bad temper recently due to the constant conflict between its mental will and physical reactions, to be honest, the Chimera Magusher had kindly sent the little fairy back. It would be unreasonable and inappropriate to kill this fellow just because it knew the location of the treetop fortress and some small secret. Even if he was concerned about the relationship with the little fellow, Caesar could not kill the chimera. Moreover, as neighbors, Blackwing's nest would inevitably have to deal with the Elven Forest in the future. The Black Dragon Lord was not a war maniac. If he could use some conciliatory means to get in touch with the Elven Forest, Caesar would naturally be more than happy to do so. Although at first glance, the Pentashade dragons and the fellows of the Elven Forest seemed to be natural enemies, if the kind races were really as gentle and intelligent as the rumors said, then Caesar felt that it would not be difficult to get in touch with them. Roar! Evil dragon! Hearing the words slave and contract, Magusher subconsciously imagined the inhumane actions of this damned black dragon. Therefore, when the Black Dragon Lord moved away and stepped on its hind legs, the chimera was filled with energy for some reason. It immediately bared its fangs and prepared to resist violently. In the end, it was once again easily pressed back into the ground by the black dragon. "Look!" Caesar pressed down on the struggling chimera with one claw and said to the little fellow sitting in the other claw, "It seems that the kind fellows are paranoid. I apologize, but they still want to fight me. You were the one who attacked first without any reason." Even if little Luna had always been on the side of her big stupid dragon, Caesar's words were righteous. The forest fairy could not help but grumble in her heart. After that, she jumped down from the black dragon's claws and flew to the chimera. "Lord Magus Hill, I'm really sorry, but please calm down for a moment. Caesar is different from the other Pentashade dragons. He's not a bad guy who's so bad that he oozes pus." Luna's words were sincere. From her point of view, the black dragon Caesar was calm and had style. He was not greedy for money or bloodthirsty, completely different from the other chromatic dragons. He would not harm other creatures for no reason, and he was rather emotional. In her eyes, Caesar was a good guy. Unfortunately, this was only the forest fairy's personal opinion. The clans under Blackwing's nest did not think so. In their understanding, the Black Dragon Lord was not only not gentle, but was rather fierce and cruel. He would not tolerate the slightest disobedience, and the slightest violation of his prohibitions would cause the Black Dragon Lord to start a bloody massacre. He was an extremely terrifying dictator. However, all in all, Caesar was indeed quite different from the other chromatic dragons. If one looked at this guy's logic and way of doing things, this Black Dragon's camp seemed to be a little skewed, and he was more like a creature of the neutral camp. Faction deviation was something that was very likely to happen in Eladia. Furthermore, such cases were quite common. Throughout history, there were many creatures that people were familiar with, such as the succubus paladins, the fallen heavens race, and so on. They were all strange products of faction deviation. Even among the lazy, greedy, and cruel chromatic dragons, there were strange existences that worshipped the platinum dragon god, Bahamut. In Eladia, there was an extremely famous and important spell that was used to determine whether one was a friend or foe. It was called alignment verification. This spell was naturally blessed by the gods, so it was very powerful. It could determine a creature's alignment based on its way of doing things and logic. Unfortunately, among the guardians of the Elven Forest, only the Chimera Magusher was here, and he did not know this effective spell. Otherwise, he could have tried to determine the Black Dragon Lord's camp. Of course, it did not matter now, because Luna was endorsing the Black Dragon Lord. Magusher felt that as a fairy living together in the Elven Forest, he could still trust her. Thus, this guy gave up on the idea of attacking again. After Caesar withdrew his claws, he stood up shakily, his broken right forelimb a little shocking. "I apologize again, Mr. Magusher," Caesar said casually. "Miss Luna, the friend your parents mentioned, could it be this dragon?" Magusher did not respond to the Black Dragon's words, and instead asked the little fellow. Although his tone was not very good, he did not call Caesar an evil dragon in the end. Speaking of which, after being beaten up by a dragon for no reason and having its forelimbs broken, it would be impossible for anyone to maintain a good mental state. It was already good enough that it didn't go berserk. On this point, at least the Chimera still maintained its gentle personality from before. The reason why he did not call Caesar an evil dragon again was firstly because of the fairy girl's words, and secondly because of the teachings of the elders in the Guardian troop. Their leader told the Guardians that before they had enough understanding of an unfamiliar creature, they should not easily label it as an evil dragon. That would affect their own subjective judgment, and was not in line with the Guardian's teachings. Although Magusher was not a powerful Guardian, his attitude in all aspects was still up to standard. Although he was angry with the Black Dragon Lord, he did not hate Caesar because of this. Therefore, at this moment, the Chimera finally endured the pain and turned around to look at the Black Dragon Lord, trying to maintain its calm, and said, "Hello, the legendary Dragon King. Hello, Mr. Chimera. It seems that what happened just now was not a beautiful misunderstanding. I apologize for the third time," Caesar said, but at the same time, he muttered in his heart, "Dragon King? Who the hell gave him this name? Did they not want him to die quickly enough? They better not let him find out who gave him this name, or else he would definitely skin that guy alive and hang him. I accept your apology, and will not pursue this matter any further," the Chimera said. No emotions could be heard in its voice. "My mission is to send Miss Luna to her destination and wait for her to meet her friend. Since you are her friend, then I think my mission has been completed. Please allow me to take my leave." "I'm afraid that won't do." Chapter 161. Since you're Luna's friend, you're naturally my friend as well. The Black Dragon's scarlet eyes stared at the Chimera. "Mr. Magus Hill, you're currently heavily injured. You need to rest and recuperate. As for leaving, you should consider it after you've fully recovered." Hearing this, the Chimera hurriedly stood up. As its right forelimb could not touch the ground, its body was slightly slanted. It hurriedly declined. "Thank you, but I don't think there's a need." It did not want to stay in Blackwing's nest. This was a territory ruled by the powerful black dragon. Who knew what would happen? The Chimera only wanted to return to the elven forest immediately. Why not? The green plains are filled with danger. I'm very worried about your safety. Without waiting for the Chimera to decline, Caesar interrupted it and called out at the same time, "Husky." The sound of flapping wings could be heard as it rapidly approached from afar. The dragonkin leader led 6 wyverns to land and respectfully prostrate. Send Mr. Magus Hill to the treetop fortress. Let the Chimera rest for a period of time and recuperate, Caesar said. Understood, Your Majesty. The wyverns lowered their heads and replied in a sharp, ear-piercing voice. I don't. Before Magus Hill could decline, red lines spread out from the black dragon lord's body. It spread its wings and left with the little fellow without hesitation. Seeing this, the Chimera could not help but let out a low growl. Even if it was in the good faction, as a weapon of war, this fellow would still be enraged. Previously, when the black dragon lord had broken its bones and stepped on it, even if it did not hate it, Magus Hill still had a lot of resentment. It was just that he did not show it, wanting to compromise and return to the elven forest first. But now, the black dragon overlord was so overbearing that it was infuriating. He didn't even give him a chance to choose. Magus Hill wasn't stupid. He knew that the black dragon overlord wasn't trying to let him rest and recuperate, but was trying to imprison him. It wanted to resist and escape, but looking at the 7 wyverns that had already surrounded it, one of which was about the same size as itself, the Chimera gave up on this idea. Without Miss Luna's sight, who knew what the black dragon's subordinates would do to it? Magus Hill did not want to suffer a second injury. For now, it could only endure the humiliation and think of a way to escape after it recovered. The Chimera planned to do so. On the other side, the black dragon brought the little fellow back to the Emerald Palace. Caesar, do you really intend to let Mr. Magus Hill go after it recovers? Luna raised her head and asked him. Although she had stayed by the black dragon lord's side for so long and was used to seeing bloodshed, the little fellow still retained the most basic kindness in her heart. Moreover, Magus Hill was not an enemy to her, but a friend. Furthermore, he was a member of the guardian team that protected the entire fairy race. Luna could not help but worry about the Chimera's safety. Oh! Caesar paused for a moment and looked at the little fellow who was looking up at him expectantly. His expression was a little unnatural, but he still said to her, "Of course. You're the best." Luna smiled happily. As usual, she hugged his neck and pressed her face against the black dragon's scales. That's right. Caesar's scarlet eyes flashed. He did not continue this topic and instead asked, "Can you tell me about the elven forest? That's your home. There should be enough to talk about." He had originally planned to take action against the elven forest after dealing with the northern countries, but the Chimera's sudden appearance forced Caesar to adjust his plans. He had a premonition that Blackwing's nest was going to make contact with the elven forest earlier than expected. Since that was the case, the Black Dragon Lord had to first understand more about that area. The elven forest, huh? He heard little Luna say in a light tone, "That's the home of many kind creatures in the north. I've told you about it before. It's a pity that you're an evil dragon and will be attacked and expelled there. Otherwise, I could bring you in to take a look." Caesar, do you know? There are lotus pods as big as houses there. There are dandelions as big as trees everywhere. There are also flower buds for fairies to sleep in. It's much more comfortable than your thorns." As she spoke, Luna slowly became excited. She circled around the black dragon, dancing up and down as she spoke. Yeah. Of course, this was not what he wanted. But seeing how happy Luna was, Caesar remained gentle and patient as he listened to her. He only asked at the end, "The elven forest has a beautiful environment and abundant resources. Won't it attract the attention of others? Are there no enemies in the elven forest?" "Of course there are," Luna said. There have been many wars in history to protect their homeland. There have also been many human adventurers with ill intentions who have tried to sneak in and capture fairies, unicorns, and other relatively weaker races. The reason why my father said that we must call Chimera Magushar Lord is because it's a member of the Guardians. They are the true guardians of the elven forest. They shelter us from the wind and rain and fight against all evil creatures who want to invade the elven forest. It's because they are willing to shed blood that they keep all unstable factors and threats outside. That's why the fairies and other weaker races can live in peace and seclusion in the elven forest. As she spoke, Luna was moved by her own words. Tears welled up in her eyes, and Caesar could feel her heartfelt respect. That's indeed worthy of respect, Black Dragon said, comforting the little one. He then asked, but the elven forest is so big. Can the Guardians protect the entire forest? Will it be hard? How many of them are there? They should be able to protect it. Luna sniffled and began to count with her fingers. Elven rangers, chimeras, giant eagles, centaurs, and tree shepherds. I heard that there are also metal dragons in the depths of the forest. It's just that dragons are a legend in our place. Very few forest fairies have seen real dragons. We also haven't sensed the presence of metal dragons in the elven forest. I'm guessing that the ruler of the elven forest must be a kind elder. Have you seen him? Oh, maybe the elven forest doesn't have a ruler. I mean, the leader of the Guardians. Luna, this silly child, was completely unguarded against Caesar. She didn't think of him as a cruel and violent pentashade dragon at all. So as long as the little one knew, Luna told him everything. Thus, Caesar knew that the leader of the elven forest's military force was a long-lived species. The elven king named Garcia Whisperwind. Although he hadn't stepped into the ranks of legends, he was a divine chosen favored by the moon god Serene. A divine elven king, even if he wasn't as powerful as the old green dragon, was probably not much weaker. Chapter 162. It was necessary to get information on his neighbors, but Caesar still needed to think carefully about the final plan to contact the elven forest. Judging from the current situation, he really needed to take that place under his command. Firstly, the elven forest was rich in resources, and there were still mineral veins left. That was very attractive to Caesar. Mining the mineral veins could provide a continuous supply of metal for smelting and the energy consumed by the Black Dragon Lord's Crimson Heart. Secondly, considering his plan to make money by selling cards in the future, he really needed a group of kind races to help him endorse the card. Because of his desire for wealth, Caesar had already put the plan of making cards in Iradia on the agenda a few days ago. When the time came, the final card would have two emblems drawn on the back. One would be the Blackwing's nest, and the other would be the Elven Forest or some other famous and kind faction. This way, its target audience would cover all races, preventing the kind races from sweeping it into the trash when they saw that it was something created by an evil dragon. There was a hidden danger. Of course, Caesar still had to sign his name at the end of the card. He needed reputation to complete the achievement and obtain the trophy, but he did not want to create any big incident that would shock Iradia and attract a crusade. He could only rely on selling cards to maintain the spread of his reputation. This might seem a little out of place, but it was actually the most important part of the Black Dragon Overlord's plan. In his previous life, there was a saying on Earth that said, "The sum of money earned by all the robbers in the world can't even compare to the annual income of a single monopoly." The Stone Crow clan, under the guidance of Caesar, had amassed a fortune that the orcs would never be able to touch in their entire lives. The Stone Crow clan had amassed a fortune that they would never be able to touch in their entire lives. However, the summer grass was already rampant. There were high-level mages among the humans who broke down every element and finally found the composition of the summer grass. After that, the news spread. Now, the entire human world, and even other races, had a large number of manufacturers selling the summer grass beverage. Therefore, Caesar had to do something about the sales of the cards. He could not waste such a good idea. The reason why the Black Dragon Lord wanted to rule the countries in the north, and even the Elven Forest, was to pave the way for the promotion of the card. After a simple analysis of the information about the Elven Forest, Caesar judged that it would not be a big problem if he really wanted to conquer that place. Unlike the past, he was no longer the weak and powerless young dragon from 7 years ago, and he did not only have the lonely Stone Crow clan as his subordinates. He was now powerful and had many subordinates. The Black Dragon Lord could totally carry out the horrifying strategy of either surrendering or dying. He could slaughter his way through the forest of elves and use the most violent and cruel method to complete his bloody rule. However, the Elven Forest was Luna's home. It could be seen that the little one cared a lot about that place. She was born and raised there. According to Luna, her parents and ancestors all lived there. They had a long history. If Caesar used violent methods to burn the Elven Forest to ruins, it was hard to imagine how sad Luna would be. She might even break down. Caesar did not want her to be sad. He did not have any big dreams. It was fine as long as he lived a good life. However, if he did that, even if his forces expanded and he obtained all the rewards he wanted, Caesar would not be able to live a good life because of the little one. If that was the case, damn it, forget it. It would be best if the leader of the Elven Forest, the Elven King named Garcia Whisperwind, was willing to cooperate and form an alliance. However, if that guy was a stubborn old man who held on to the old-fashioned concept of camp or chose to isolate himself from the outside world, then the Black Dragon Lord would not have any better ideas. At most, he would not touch that place. Iradia was so big, and there was more than one famous camp in the north. For Luna, Caesar was willing to give in. Even if this piece of meat was right next to the mouth of Blackwing's nest and was within reach, Caesar could still choose to avoid it. As for Chimera Magusher, let it go. Go wherever you like. Hurry up and get lost. Don't waste food in Blackwing's nest. We can't afford to raise such a monster. Of course, if this guy dragged the troops of the Elven Forest to find trouble, then he really deserved a beating. Late at night, Luna had already curled up in the thorns on his back and fallen asleep. The Black Dragon Lord lay on the ground and thought for a long time before finally making a series of decisions. He had completed a change in mentality and completely thought it through. It was true that the expansion of forces, the collection of resources, and the acquisition of rewards were all important, but the reason why Caesar did all that was to live more comfortably and protect the things that he wanted to protect, instead of neglecting the essentials and becoming a slave in pursuit of those things, turning into an emotionless machine. After thinking about all this, Caesar's mood became much more relaxed. His eyes were no longer gloomy as before. He yawned and turned his neck 180 degrees to look at the little girl on his back. Then, he closed his eyes and slept peacefully. At dawn the next day, Caesar suddenly heard the cry of the wyvern. At first, he thought that the chimera had found a chance to escape. In the end, he realized that this was not the case. It was Hogg who had returned. However, that guy did not come directly to the treetop fortress. He only sent 2 gnolls to report. This was because the gnoll leader had brought back a large group of whimpering gnomes. This guy was not bad. Although Caesar was a little annoyed from waiting these days, it was not easy to capture a large group of gnomes in just a month's time. Looking at it this way, Hogg's efficiency was still quite guaranteed. With the little girl still sleeping soundly on his back, Caesar climbed out of the treetop fortress and began to fly to the edge of Blackwing's nest. Like now, without using extreme speed and maintaining a steady pace, the Black Dragon's Crimson Heart could provide him with flight for a very long time. Gnomes were also a very representative and lowly species. Not only were there many of them in Iradia, but they were also like locusts that covered many outer world. They were a very famous, dirty, chaotic, and detestable race. These guys were covered in a layer of disgusting green skin. They had large heads that were disproportionate to their bodies, sharp and thin ears, and a pair of strong feet with protruding bones. Most of the gnomes were lazy, cowardly, and greedy. Most importantly, these guys did not know what fear was. It was not that they were like the orcs and did not know fear. On the contrary, these guys were rather cowardly. They had no resistance against powerful creatures and could not wait to bury their heads in their pants. However, as long as those powerful creatures did not appear in their line of sight, these guys would forget the injuries and threats they had suffered before and return to their original nature. Therefore, if one wanted to order the gnomes to do things, one had to have a relative holding a butcher's knife and watching over them at all times. Not a second more or less could be missed. One had to be in their line of sight at all times for these guys to remain stable and obedient. Because of this, the other intelligent creatures in Iradia generally hated this race. They thought that they were scum that was even lower than the kobolds. Even the pentashade dragons young would not think of ordering them around. They only planned to use these guys to make soup. Chapter 163. However, it would be too subjective and one-sided to say that the goblins had no merits and were all trash. Caesar was very interested in Iradia's culture and culture. He had a deep understanding of many species, even the lowly species that the intelligent species despised and abandoned, such as the kobolds, gnomes, and goblins, had a more comprehensive understanding of them. From the books he had read, the Black Dragon Lord understood that the goblins' creative spirit and alchemy talent were one of the best among the many species in Iradia. Although they were often unreliable, they could occasionally come up with many good things on a whim. For example, the giant puppet weapons that had shone brilliantly in the countless wars of the Second Epoch had been created by the goblins using the giant goblins as their prototype. Of course, as Eladia continued to develop, the original puppet weapons had long since been eliminated. They were replaced by even more powerful construct magic statues that were created using magic conducting power. Furthermore, these fellows' talent in engineering was not much weaker than that of the wild boar people, and in terms of forging, they were far ahead of all the clans under Blackwing's nest. It was under the influence of these factors that the great Commander Hogg had left Blackwing's nest with his legendary weapon, Bloodthirst, to search for and capture the goblins. The gnolls were stationed at the periphery of Blackwing's nest. They formed a circle with weapons in hand, sealing off the buzzing goblins. At a glance, there were about 200 to 300 goblins here, which was roughly equivalent to a small goblin community. At this moment, Caesar arrived. Accompanied by low rumbling thunder and surging crimson flames in the sky, the black dragon approached from afar, rapidly enlarging. Caesar still could not learn how to glide and slow down. He crashed into the ground with a boom, landing on a steep slope not far away. Accompanied by a loud crash, the ground beneath the black dragon's feet let out a hoarse wail, cracks spreading out one after another, and a surge of sand and dust was swept up. The goblins were scared out of their wits by the sound of an explosion. They hugged the big green head with both hands, squatted down, and buried their heads in the crotch of their pants. Cries for mercy kept coming out of their mouth. In contrast, the jack-o'-lanterns were much calmer. They only lowered their heads in awe and did not do anything embarrassing. "Your Majesty!" Hogg walked over and placed Bloodthirst on the ground. He knelt down on one knee and placed his right paw on the handle of the axe, saying, "This is the gnome tribe from the uninhabited lands in the north. There are gnomes, kobolds, and cave-dwellers everywhere. However, the number of wolf pups I brought with me was limited, so I could only restrain this number of gnomes." Not only had the Jackalan leader completed his mission, but he had also brought back information about the unknown region in the north. Well done. Black Dragon nodded and was not stingy with his encouragement. Hogg was indeed worthy of praise. At least until now, he had not disappointed him. How many goblins are there here? 273, but many died along the way. I did not have time to count them, Your Majesty. That was enough. The main task of the goblins was to smelt metal and make weapons. As long as he could enslave them and prevent them from slacking off or running away, these few hundred would be enough to satisfy the current needs of Blackwing's nest. With the goblins in place, the mining plan was put on the agenda. There were mines in the Green Plains as well. A few miles behind Blackwing's nest's treetop fortress, there was a black iron mine that had been discovered long ago. The Mother of Poisons had been mining it for a long time, but Sylvia did not have high-quality miners like the kobolds and grey dwarves, so the efficiency was low. Later on, due to the war and the change of power, mining came to a complete halt. And now, Caesar was preparing to restart the mining plan of the Black Iron Mine. No matter how rich the Green Capital's treasury was, without replenishment, it would face the predicament of sitting on nothing. Some time ago, the scattered kobolds that had been trembling at the edge of Blackwing's nest, wanting to seek shelter, could now be put to good use. Divide an independent area and settle these goblins down. Then, transfer some people from the various clans to closely monitor the goblin community and force them to obey the orders of Blackwing's nest. Caesar said, also, after you return, rest for 2 days and make preparations. As usual, you will take over the management of Blackwing's nest. I am about to fall into a deep sleep. You will become the King of the North, Your Majesty. Hearing this, Hogg nodded and accepted the order, at the same time complimenting him. He knew that dragons grew and matured after a long period of hibernation. Every long period of hibernation would allow them to absorb the knowledge of the dragon's inheritance. When they woke up, they would become even more powerful. Unfortunately, this flattery was not on point. In Caesar's eyes, becoming the King of the North was not an impossible goal. If nothing unexpected happened, he only needed to crush the countries in the north and pull the elven forest to his side. Then, he would be able to easily obtain the title without the coronation. Although Hogg was intelligent enough and had experienced enough twists and turns, due to the factor of strength, becoming the King of the North was already the limit of the Knoll leader's imagination. With his empty mind, he could not think of a more powerful existence at the moment. The Black Dragon nodded. This damned fellow liked to hear people flatter him. As long as it was not the dry and awkward kind of flattery of the kobolds, the Black Dragon would accept any slightly more normal praise and would gladly enjoy it. Hogg's heartfelt flattery made him feel much better. He paused for a moment, then brought up another matter. When the time comes, if the orcs bring the Taurens back, arrange for the Taurens to farm. You can contact Kaki's shape-shifting monster leader and ask him directly for some necessary resources that Blackwing's nest does not have. Also, if Gaul still does not return after a month, wake me up at the Emerald Palace. I have to go look for them. Yes, Your Majesty. The Knoll leader, who was half kneeling on the ground, nodded and accepted the order. Hogg was already strong enough, but compared to the Black Dragon Lord, he was still far from it. Caesar's body had already grown to an exaggerated degree. In the history of Iradia, even the Red Dragon had not been as strong as him. This fellow's muscles were knotted and arched, resisting the armor and thorns of the exoskeleton, as if the scales on his skin were about to be torn apart. After everything was arranged, Caesar was not interested in watching the chaotic scene of the gnolls settling the goblins down. The Black Dragon Lord directly turned around and returned with the crimson flames. It was still early, so he could still go back to sleep or something. At this stage, he could not enter a long sleep, so he had to at least make up for it with a little rest. 4 dragons, sleeping for an entire day and night was really just a small nap. Chapter 164. After releasing Chimera Magusher and arranging everything properly, Caesar had wanted to seal the treetop fortress and hide in the green capital's treasure trove. Then, he would dig through all the shiny things and welcome the long-delayed slumber. However, a sudden small matter caused the Black Dragon Overlord to have no choice but to postpone this wish. The Brendel family, or rather the shapeshifters, in the Khaki territory at the Rhine border had contacted their master and sent over something. It was said to be a treasure unearthed from Count Brendel's mansion. It was hidden in a secret room, and the shapeshifters had only just discovered it. They did not know what it was, but since it was hidden so well, it should belong to some treasure of Brendel's family. They did not dare to hide it from the Black Dragon Lord and very honestly sent someone to deliver it. That's it. Caesar looked at the little thing in front of him and asked the shapeshifters who were responsible for delivering it. In that secret room, we only found this, Your Majesty. The shapeshifters said. I know, you may leave. Caesar waved his claws disappointedly, thinking that it was something good. After casually sending the shapeshifters away, the Black Dragon Lord reluctantly perked up a little and looked at the small sculpture that looked like a handicraft. It was only about 10 centimeters tall, and compared to the huge Black Dragon Lord, it was like a mosquito. Moreover, the carving was very crude, even inferior to the ancient orcs' relief carvings in the underground passage of the abandoned city. It was simply unsightly. This thing was a depiction of a monster with a vague humanoid silhouette, but it had tentacles spread out from its chin like an octopus. Its body seemed to be covered in scales, and its hands and feet were long and thin sharp claws. There was a pair of long and narrow wings on its back that were obviously unable to fly. Whether it was the material or the craftsmanship, this thing was extremely inferior, but there was a faint sense of vividness, as if accompanied by an innate, extremely cold viciousness. The monster in the sculpture was squatting on a stone slab covered with randomly drawn characters. It was indeed squatting, and its back was bent forward. The tips of its wings were pressed against the back of the stone slab, and its long, curled foreclaws extended over the four edges of the stone slab and held it upside down. The grotesque humanoid face was the most exquisite part of the whole sculpture. Its eyes were smiling, and it was very exaggerated. Tsk tisk. Caesar smacked his lips and looked at this little thing with interest. After coming to Iradia, he had seen too many deformed and ugly clans. Although this thing was a little strange, it was not to the point of shock to his soul. However, for some reason, he felt that this thing was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. It was obviously created recently. The carvings were very new, and some of the corners were still sharp. Maybe it was something that one of Brendel's servants had nothing better to do and casually made, but for some reason, it was put in the secret room. In any case, there was one thing that was without doubt: this thing was very cheap. Dragons were born with an innate talent for valuing treasures, so Caesar could tell at a glance that this was not something expensive. It could not even be sold for a few copper coins. In that case, it had lost its value to Caesar. As for its historical origin and meaning, the Black Dragon did not want to delve into it. His energy was limited, and he did not have time to think about these things. The Black Dragon stretched out his claws and was ready to throw this thing away. It seemed that the shape-shifting monsters were getting more and more stupid. They dared to send anything to him without checking whether it was a treasure or not, and whether it had any collection value. It needed to be taught a lesson. Do you thirst for power? Just as Caesar's claws were about to touch the small sculpture, a misty whisper suddenly sounded in his ears. The tone was like the murmurs of people deep in their dreams, delirious ravings. It was very slow and very vague. What? Caesar froze for a moment and asked subconsciously. He looked around. The Emerald Palace was empty, and the only little one was sleeping in the small house in the Green Dragon's treasury. Hearing that Caesar was going to fall into a deep sleep in the Green Dragon's treasury, Luna had built a small house there first. In other words, there was no living thing nearby. "Do you thirst for power?" The low murmur sounded again. This time, Caesar did not answer. He leaned over and stared at the small sculpture that was sent over. He blinked, thought for a while, and then suddenly realized, "Are you Thun? Or Cthulhu?" He finally knew why he felt familiar. As a soul from another world, this sculpture model was very similar to the description of an evil god myth he had read in his previous life. The style was almost exactly the same, but because he had been in Iradia for too long, Caesar had forgotten a lot of things he had experienced on Earth. Now, after being reminded several times, he finally remembered. "Do you thirst for power?" It repeated for the third time. "So, you are the instigator of that strange oath in Brendel's family?" The Black Dragon Lord did not answer. He lay down, put his neck flat on the ground, and looked at the vicious and strange little sculpture. "You are not an outer god, are you? Although you look decent, you actually need to take the initiative to hook up with other creatures. The legendary outer gods would not be so low-level. Do you thirst for power? You don't even have the ability to connect. It seems like you have a hard time? Iradia's gods allow you to do this? Won't you be beaten? Are you a demon, a devil, or something else? Do you thirst for power? What method did you use to communicate with me? Will it attract the attention of the gods? Where is your real body? Do you eat meat or are you a vegetarian? Do you want to wear clothes? Do you need to excrete? What is the position of excretion?" The murmuring voice disappeared. The black dragon lay on the ground, his scarlet vertical eyes remaining indifferent as he stared at the little sculpture. After waiting for a long time and making sure that there was no more movement, he quietly breathed a sigh of relief. To be honest, when he guessed that the other party might be a life form like an outer god or an old god, he did feel fear. However, Caesar knew that fear wouldn't solve the problem. It would only make things worse. Since the other party had already come knocking on his door, he could only face it. Now that he seemed to have gotten rid of that thing, looking back, the shapeshifters discovered that it did not seem to be a coincidence. Although they did not betray him, they might have been influenced by their subconscious to do such a thing. Fortunately, the unknown thing was not that strong. Otherwise, it would not have just repeated an inexplicable sentence, and Caesar's mind would not have been able to remain rational. It should be something that invaded Iradia, a devil, or something like that. Caesar personally came to this conclusion after combining his experience and the information that was currently known. Of course, he did not want to think too deeply about it. This lazy dragon was not that curious. It would not investigate the mysteries of the continent, the conspiracies, and so on. This fellow only wanted to live a comfortable life. Therefore, Caesar would naturally keep a respectful distance from gods, demons, and even other strange foods. In order to avoid any more trouble, he directly found 2 scapegoats to send the statue to a place far away from Blackwing's nest. Then, they would completely destroy it. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.